Hey guys, tonight we drift through a tale that rarely gets a spotlight, not because it lacks drama, but because its silence is louder. The glow of golden goblets, the glint of powdered glass in candlelight, the gentle bubbling of something unpronounceable in an alembic. These details linger in the margins of medieval life, whispering their warnings too late. You think of kings as armored and unshakable, but they were often more fragile than peasants, surrounded by potions and powders that gleamed with promise and simmered with poison. The danger wasn't in the dagger, it was in the cup by the bed, the tincture on the tongue. That's the quiet terror of tonight's story. You probably won't survive this, not if you trusted what your royal physician handed you before sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere strange or cozy, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we drift together. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lie back and imagine you're stepping into the royal chambers of the late 1300s, velvet curtains drawn, fire crackling, and on the polished wood table beside the king's bed rests a goblet, filled with something meant to soothe. Its surface glows amber in the firelight, catching your eye. But look closer. That shimmer isn't just wine. It's flecked with particles so fine they seem to dance on the liquid surface. The shimmer is from lead oxide, suspended in solution. It glitters like magic, and like magic, it lies. The goblet itself, crafted lovingly by artisans, has edges lined in pewter and alloy that leaks slow death when kissed by acidic drink. Every sip of the king's nightcap draws more of the invisible toxin into his blood. He doesn't notice. Nobody does. Not yet. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The room glows warm, but every object in it, the decanter, the vial, the carved flask, is part of a quiet conspiracy. Medieval royalty was bathed in beauty, and beauty then came with a price. The finest glassware was blown with arsenic to give it sparkle. Stains on goblets shimmered because they were laced with powdered copper and gold. What you thought was luxury was really a chemistry experiment, and you, the noble, were the one being tested. Historians still argue whether the artisans truly understood how lethal their materials were. Some say they knew, whispering warnings behind workshop doors. Others insist ignorance was genuine, that everyone believed the beauty was harmless. But ignorance doesn't protect you, not from slow poisoning. You imagine the king's steward entering, adjusting the flask of scented water beside the goblet. He waves off the smoke from a bit of burning frankincense, blissfully unaware that the incense smoke carries trace mercury, which had been added to sharpen the scent. You inhale with him, curious, just a sniff. Your head swims a little, your stomach tightens, a tingle in your gums. It's subtle, but relentless. 1 night is nothing. 10 nights is a pattern. A lifetime is a tomb built slowly, lovingly, from within. In the next chamber, the apothecary sleeps lightly, always ready to mix a midnight tonic. His shelves are crowded vials of antimony, jars of powdered mother of pearl, tinctures with names like elixir of the moon. You reach for a bottle marked aquafortis nitric acid, though he doesn't know it yet. He thinks it's purifying. He uses it to clean the king's amulets. The king then wears those amulets against his bare skin, letting the acid trace invisible burns across his chest. You watch, helpless, as the ritual continues night after night, because it is tradition, and tradition is always right until it kills you. One of the goblets bears an inscription, a spell, etched in Latin. You lean in, lips moving slowly to decipher it. Something about protection, something about eternal youth, and again, you feel the irony settle over your chest like a heavy quilt. The kings wanted to live forever, and so they drank what they were told, wore what they were given, inhaled what they were offered, all in the name of health, all in the name of survival. The tragedy isn't that they were poisoned. The tragedy is that they paid for the poison themselves, called it luxury, and asked for refills. The fire pops in the hearth. Your eyes shift to the carved shelf just above it, where the royal seal is engraved into the wood. You trace it with your gaze, noticing how dark the finish is, almost black in places. That's because the polish is mixed with cinnabar mercuric sulfide, used for its deep red hue. It was ground fine and smeared on everything from wood to lips. The queen's rouge is made of the same compound. She dabs it on nightly, convinced it lends her youth. You recall now that the royal physician has been adjusting her doses lately, trying to address her dizziness. He suspects a humoral imbalance. He prescribes leeching. You exhale, slowly. You know what he doesn't. There's a final, softer touch to this chamber of doom. A little cloth doll, perhaps belonging to the princess, rests in a corner chair. Its face is painted, its body stuffed with herbs, lavender, sage, and belladonna, deadly nightshade, supposed to aid sleep. You smile despite yourself. Nothing in this room escapes the alchemist's hand. Not the water, not the scent, not the innocence of a child's toy. It's all been touched, transformed by men who sought to manipulate nature without fully understanding it. You pause on that thought. Alchemy wasn't wicked. It was naive. It didn't mean harm, but it refused to believe it could cause it. Down in the kitchens, a scullery maid scrubs goblets with vinegar and ash, hoping to please. Her hands are raw. The vinegar reacts with a leaded glaze, stripping it slowly into the wine cups above. Nobody notices. The king drinks, the queen powders, the doctor prays. The alchemist mixes another tincture, his hands trembling ever so slightly now. He's begun to suspect the truth, but he won't say anything. Not yet. He's too close, too proud. Maybe, he thinks, a little more refinement will remove the side effects. Maybe it just needs one more distillation, one more purification, one more night. And here you are, lying in that very room, if only in imagination, listening, breathing the same invisible smoke, sipping the same gilded wine. You'd think, with all that danger around, someone would say something, but no one does, because the danger doesn't announce itself with a dagger or a scream. It arrives softly, in glitter, in gold, in glassware so beautiful you can't help but trust it. And once you trust it, you're already too late. You step deeper into the halls behind the royal chambers, where the flicker of candlelight grows dimmer, and the air thickens with strange smells, burnt herbs, damp straw, and something metallic, sour, clinging to your tongue. You pass a thick wooden door marked not with words, but with a symbol, two interlocking circles with a slash through them, the ancient sign of secrecy. Push gently. It creaks open to reveal the heart of the alchemist's world. Not quite a laboratory, not quite a chapel. A cramped, cluttered room where theology and experimentation wrestle for control. Here, the alchemist works by moonlight and instinct. Equal parts mystic, doctor, and dangerous roommate. You crouch beside him as he grinds something into powder with a mortar and pestle. It looks like a mineral, gray and dull. He mutters to himself, consulting a manuscript so stained, it looks more like a battlefield than a book. You read over his shoulder. He's mixing galena lead sulfide. He thinks he's purifying it, unlocking its divine potential. You know he's refining poison. Behind him, another figure coughs. That's a brother Anselm, a monk who claims to be here for the pursuit of divine knowledge. But he's mostly here because he was expelled from 3 other monasteries for setting things on fire. Now he tends the furnace. It belches smoke in irregular intervals, fed with scraps of old parchment and goat dung. Anselm says the smell keeps away demons. You suspect it just masks the stench of miscalculation. Over by the far wall, there's another assistant, barely a boy, mixing something called sal ammoniac into boiling urine. You don't ask why. You don't want to know. But you watch as the steam rises, seeps into the wooden rafters, and drips back down in dirty little pearls. The entire room feels like it's sweating secrets. Historians still argue whether these cramped laboratories were centers of innovation or madness. On one hand, they laid groundwork for modern chemistry. On the other, they stored vials of substances that could, and often did, kill you by touch alone. You tiptoe past a jar labeled oil of vitriol, which today you'd recognize as sulfuric acid. It's leaking slightly. The shelf it sits on is bowed and scorched. Right above it, a cluster of feathers and bone charms hung to absorb ill intent. There's no protective gear, no gloves, just hope and habit. The alchemist wipes his brow with the same hand he just dipped into mercury paste. You see the tremor in his fingers. You wonder if he does. You glance at the walls. They're lined with notes, recipes, drawings of planetary alignments, and instructions scribbled in code. One line catches your eye: solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. It's the Alchemist's creed. Break everything apart, then find what's left when nothing else remains. It sounds romantic, until you remember it applies not just to metals, but to bodies. One mistake, and your liver becomes a test case. Still, the dream is seductive. The room crackles with the hum of belief. These men aren't trying to poison anyone. They're trying to purify everything, including themselves. Alchemy was never just science, it was penance, ego, salvation. You follow the alchemist to the hearth, where he's begun heating a mixture he calls aurum potable drinkable gold. He believes this elixir will heal the king's fatigue, but the process of making it involves boiling gold leaf in nitric acid, then mixing it with ethanol, and reducing it over flame in a copper crucible. The fumes alone could send you into convulsions. The final product glows like sunrise in a glass tube. He holds it up, eyes wide. Look, he whispers, perfection. You notice he says nothing about the batch from last week that gave the royal scribe bloody gums and memory loss. That's the cost of progress. It's also the cost of denial. One shelf houses the failed experiments. Little bottles labeled with strange names: dragon's milk, white lion saliva, Venus dew. You open one out of curiosity and immediately wish you hadn't. The smell hits like rot mixed with perfume. A tincture of rotten eggs, copper, and rose water designed to cure melancholy. It didn't. It made the treasurer weep uncontrollably for 3 days and forget how numbers worked. He still can't count past 10 without removing his shoes. The alchemist blamed it on the stars. The monk blamed it on sin. The truth, as usual, was buried in the bottom of the beaker. You sit on a stool by the hearth, the fire popping beside you, and watch the alchemist sort his tools. Glass rods with curled ends, bronze tweezers crusted with green patina, a chisel for shaving antimony. He handles each one like a sacred relic. He believes the arrangement matters, that the order of tools can align with the order of the planets. Today is a Mars day, so he uses the red ink quill. You stifle a laugh, but quietly. This isn't superstition, it's structure. Without it, the chaos of their world would be unbearable. Rats scurry across the rafters. One pauses, stares at you, and blinks, even it seems unconvinced. Behind you, a curtain stirs. It separates the lab from the sleeping quarters. You peek through: a mattress of hay, a chamber pot, a single candle, and 3 books bound in cracked leather. One is a copy of Pliny's Natural History. The second is a prayer book. The third is unlabeled. You flip through. Inside are drawings, humans split open like diagrams, with arrows pointing to organs, notes on which metals affect which parts of the body. Lead for the mind. One reads, mercury for the spirit, gold for the heart. There are red stains on the pages. You can't tell if it's ink or blood. You stop turning. The air grows warmer. The fumes from the furnace intensify. The copper coil begins to spit. The boy stirring the urine concoction coughs, then sneezes violently into the vat. Nobody flinches. This is normal. You begin to understand that this lab isn't just a workspace. It's a belief system. Every fume is sacred. Every reaction, a sign. Failure is never the compound's fault. It's the alignment, the humidity, the impurity in your own soul. You see now why alchemy lasted so long. It wasn't because it worked. It was because it could always explain why it didn't. Suddenly, the alchemist curses. A vial has cracked, spilling a glowing liquid onto the floor. It sizzles against the stone. He leaps back, shouting for water. The monk throws a bucket wrong one. It's filled with something flammable. The liquid flashes. A brief bloom of fire. No one is hurt, but the corner blackens. The boy faints. The monk starts to laugh. The alchemist screams at them both, then sinks into a chair, breathing hard, hands shaking. You realize this isn't rare. This is Tuesday. The court never sees this part. The accidents, the desperation, the bruises hidden under sleeves. You return to the doorway, ready to leave, but as you turn, you hear the alchemist whisper something. Next time, I'll get it right. He's not talking to you. He's talking to the flask, or maybe the king, or maybe to God. You step out and close the door quietly behind you, the scent of brimstone clinging to your clothes. You take one last look at the symbol on the door, interlocking circles, balance, promise, folly. You pad softly across the stone corridor, back toward the royal chambers, following the faint scent of honeyed wine and lavender oil, the king's nightly ritual. His bedchamber is still, though not quiet. The fire hisses, a wax candle drips, and beside his carved oak bed sits the physician, nodding off with a silver bowl resting on his lap. Inside it, a warm concoction swirling gently crushed pearls, dissolved sugar of lead, saffron, and a dash of spirit of wine. It's called the King's Elixir. It's meant to ease sleep, improve complexion, and balance the humors. You glance at the king's face, soft, pale, slack with fatigue that no amount of rest can cure. He sips this same brew every evening, as part of a regimen recommended by the court's medical astrologer. You watch his lips part, his throat move, and for a second you wonder, does he taste the metal? Or has the sweetness masked it so well that even death goes down smooth? You notice the cup, it's different tonight. A goblet of bohemian glass, tinted violet, with golden etching, a gift from a foreign diplomat. It shimmers with flecks that look like stars trapped in crystal. The court loves this kind of thing, exotic vessels with alchemical origins. The irony, of course, is that the color comes from manganese and arsenic, mixed into the silica during firing. The more beautiful the goblet, the more dangerous the drink. But no one warns the king. No one questions the fashion. The physician certainly doesn't. He's proud of the exotic gift, proud to pour such a special potion into such a royal glass. Historians still argue whether physicians of the time were genuinely unaware of the substances they used, or merely too confident in their humoral logic to notice the rot they were prescribing. The truth may be duller, sadder they knew something was off, but they had no better answers. You inch closer and examine the scrolls scattered on the side table. They're filled with daily prescriptions: drink goat's milk steeped in rose petals at dawn, avoid the wind on Wednesdays, bathe the feet in brine before dusk. Each step a dance to please unseen forces. Every bodily complaint, tiredness, sadness, indigestion was interpreted through the lens of four humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. If the king felt heavy, it was melancholic excess. If he grew irritable, too much choler. The cure, a balancing act performed with ingredients you now know should have come with hazard warnings. Lead was thought to cool the blood. Mercury, stimulate the spirit. Antimony, purge impurities. You imagine reading that aloud today at a pharmacy and getting arrested. But in this time, your credentials come from the stars. The court physician has spent half the day calculating the positions of Mars and Saturn before prescribing a broth infused with crushed coral and vinegar. The coral is powdered by hand in the alchemist's lab. The vinegar is boiled in a copper pot whose lining flakes with age. The result is a tangy soup that causes the king to sweat through his sheets, but he calls it cleansing. He believes it helps. You watch him nod off, eyes glassy, breathing uneven. This is not an assassination. It's tradition. No one means harm, and yet the harm is complete. On the wall hangs a small wooden plaque, an engraved moon surrounded by tiny stars. It marks the king's sleep cycle, which is monitored and adjusted by the court astronomer. You shake your head a little. This whole kingdom is run by dreams and diagrams. The physician and the astronomer have a standing rivalry over who knows the king's body better. They once argued for a full hour over whether the king's recurring headaches were caused by lunar pull or intestinal ghosts. You think that's a joke, but no. It's actually documented in a surviving letter. You stifle a laugh, then feel it catch in your throat, because the next sentence describes the king vomiting blood and weeping from the eyes. The cause: a seasonal corruption of the humors, accelerated by celestial misalignment. You whisper to yourself, or maybe just the lead. Next to the bed, a small brass censer hangs from a chain. It swings gently, its smoke curling toward the ceiling. The mix tonight: frankincense, wormwood, and a pinch of white arsenic. It's meant to clarify the air. You cover your nose, but the king inhales deeply. The physician fans it toward him. The scent is sharp, almost sweet, pleasant in a strange, artificial way. You can't help but admire how sensory this world is. Everything touched, tasted, smelled, absorbed. But the senses deceive. That sweet note is death, finely ground. You remember now, arsenic was also used to preserve meat. And mummies. It's a versatile little killer. You glance to the bedside table. There's a set of small ivory tablets, perfumed lozenges to suck on before sleep. Tonight's flavor rose, lavender, and lead acetate. It's called Sugar of Saturn. You want to scream, but of course, you don't. You're only observing. You watch the king tuck one under his tongue. His eyes flutter. He murmurs something about warmth. You look away. The damage is invisible for now. Tomorrow, he'll wake slower. His joints will ache more. The whites of his eyes will yellow just slightly, and no one will notice. It will be called age, or stress, or the will of the heavens. The queen enters briefly, wrapped in a shawl of dyed silk. Her lips are tinted pale red rouge made from cinnabar. Her cheeks shimmer faintly. She leans down and kisses the king's forehead, her painted skin touching his sweat. You know that kiss carries mercury and lead, but it also carries comfort. That's the tragedy here. Poison isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's tender. Sometimes it looks like love. You watch her pour herself a tiny cup of the same elixir. She sips slowly, eyes closing. The physician nods in approval. She smiles. Then she leaves. Her footsteps soft, her presence fading like perfume. The room dims. Only the hearth remains lit. Shadows dance across the walls, flickering on gold-framed portraits of long-dead rulers. You wonder how many of them died the same way slowly, unknowingly, from the very cures meant to save them. You realize this isn't just one king's story. It's a pattern, a lineage. You recall a line from an old chronicle, the king's strength fades in silence, like silver tarnished by breath. It wasn't metaphor, it was chemistry. You lie beside the fire now, imagining your own skin absorbing what's in the air, the fumes, the tinctures, the dust from powdered pearls and dried beetles. You can taste it on your teeth. You wonder, if you lived then, would you have questioned any of it, or would you, like everyone else, have bowed to the tincture, kissed the goblet, trusted the ritual? You want to believe you'd know better, but doubt creeps in. The king, after all, has the best of everything: advice, food, clothing, sleep, and still, he suffers. Still, he withers. And here's the quiet horror of it: he doesn't even know. He closes his eyes, lulled by the flickering light, his breath slowing, his fingers curling slightly under the sheet. He thinks he's safe. The physician writes in his ledger, satisfied, another night's rest, another healing complete. You rise, barely able to look. You step out into the hall again, heart heavy. The chamber door closes softly behind you. Inside, the king dreams. He won't wake well, but he will wake, at least for now. You follow the winding corridor down toward the more hidden corners of the castle, where the walls close in tighter and the scent of soot and strange minerals grows stronger. This is where alchemy meets obsession, the part of the fortress not listed on tour maps, where a few torchlit doors open onto rooms stacked high with experiments half finished and dreams half dead. The clanging you hear now isn't a blacksmith, it's the echo of ambition. A young apprentice slams shut a crucible lid as you enter. He doesn't look up. His hands are blistered, his nails stained black from constant exposure to who knows what. On the table beside him sits a small bowl filled with a dull green paste arsenic trioxide, mixed with crushed emeralds. You blink. He thinks he's found a shortcut, something that might transmute base metals faster, something that will finally turn pewter into gold. He stirs it like it's porridge. You wince. The quest to transmute metals, the dream of turning lead into gold, wasn't just a mad fantasy. It was a philosophy, a cosmology, and yes, an addiction. The logic felt impeccable. If all matter came from the same primal essence, then surely, with the right manipulation, you could refine the base into the divine. Gold was the ultimate symbol of perfection, and so men devoted decades of their lives, poured fortunes into furnaces, inhaled death in increments, and called it progress. You walk past a wall scrawled with equations and symbols, none of which hold up under modern scrutiny. But you don't feel smug. You feel haunted, because you realize these men weren't fools. They were faithful. They believed in the order of the universe more than they feared its chaos. A heavy tome lies open nearby, pages warped from heat and moisture. You read aloud a phrase, "Calcination prepares the soul for divine union." That's not chemistry. That's theology dressed as science. In the mind of a medieval alchemist, to turn lead into gold was to purify sin into virtue. But purification has a price. To calcinate something, you must first destroy it. You glance around the room and see the results bottles labeled Essence of Earth, Oil of Copper, and Red Spirit. Each one has caused at least one injury, if not worse. Historians still debate whether early alchemists genuinely expected transmutation to succeed, or whether it was a symbolic pursuit all along. You look at the burns on the apprentice's hands. If this is just a symbol, it's a brutal one. One corner of the lab contains an old reliquary chest, its original purpose long since forgotten. Now it's filled with chunks of strange metals, bismuth, tin, antimony, and a few nodules labeled serpent stone. You pick one up. It's warm to the touch. That's impossible, you think? Then again, so is everything else in here. You set it down carefully and move toward the main bench, where the master alchemist, older, calmer, more calculating, leans over a tray of coins. He's working on what he calls gilded falsum, counterfeit coins coated with a thin veneer of real gold, achieved through an electrochemical bath. He doesn't know that word electrochemical, but he knows how to make it work. The bath contains mercury nitrate. The fumes rising from it sting your eyes immediately. The apprentice doesn't flinch. He hasn't blinked in hours. This particular process was once taught in noble courts as a useful diversion, something to entertain guests between hunts. You suppress a shudder. At least the animals died quickly. You imagine a duke, his fingers trembling, dropping a silver coin into the bath, marveling as it emerges golden and glowing, not realizing the real price is his breath, his blood, his bone marrow eroding over the course of years. You touch your own throat reflexively. It itches, as if in sympathy. The master lifts the tray, eyes gleaming, nearly pure. He whispers, though you know it's not. The gilding flakes off with the slightest pressure, but he's convinced. He's already planning to present the coin to the king, hoping to regain lost favor. You remember hearing that the previous court alchemist was dismissed for suggesting the queen's miscarriage was caused by proximity to Mercury? He wasn't wrong. He just said it out loud. This one won't make that mistake. He'll smile, he'll flatter, and he'll keep dosing the court with tinctures that promise purity while quietly delivering decay. You walk over to another table, covered in scrolls correspondence between alchemists and distant courts. The letters are written in ciphered Latin, filled with phrases like dragon's tears and green lion. You realize they're talking about sulfuric acid and aqua regia, substances corrosive enough to melt gold. Imagine that. Liquids that devour kings' crowns. You pause there, letting the image settle. In this room, crowns aren't symbols, they're ingredients. In a far corner, under a tarp, you find a forgotten experiment, a series of glass flasks connected by tubes and sealed with wax. Inside, a sludge of reddish-black tar bubbles gently over a clay burner. A label reads, "Elixir of Longevity." You shake your head. This again. Always this. The dream of cheating time, of outpacing death with a few powders and prayers. The apprentice tells you the elixir contains lead oxide, wine, crushed rubies, and something extracted from sheep's liver. The rubies, he adds proudly, increase the soul's vibrational purity. You ask if he's tested it. He says nothing, just looks away, and scratches his arm. You recognize the symptoms: tremor, memory lapses, skin rash. You've seen them in the king. You've seen them in the cooks, the scribes, the courtiers. This isn't coincidence. This is correlation. But in this era, correlation doesn't mean what it does now. Here, if the elixir fails, it's because the moon was waning, or because the subject's spirit wasn't ready. You want to scream, but again, you can't. You're only watching, only drifting. A spider scuttles across a cracked windowsill. You stare at it. wondering what it thinks of all this. Does it sense the danger in the air? Or is it just happy to feast on the flies that gather near the open tinctures? You shake off the thought and step back toward the furnace. Its door's ajar. Inside, something glows faintly blue. You're not sure what it is. The apprentice isn't sure either. We added saltpeter and eaglebone. He shrugs. It sings sometimes. You don't ask what he means by sings. You already suspect you won't like the answer. The walls here are streaked with soot and old blood finger pricks for ritual testing. They claim, you believe it, alchemy was part chemistry, part magic, part performance art. Nothing worked unless you truly believed it would. The problem, of course, is that some things did work, just not the way they wanted. You glance again at the green paste, the red elixir, the gold-plated coins. It's all so beautiful, and so wrong. The master closes his book for the night. He yawns, eyes heavy, hands shaking slightly. He doesn't realize he's dying. Not yet. The symptoms creep. The poison settles slowly. The dream continues. He places a small ampule on the shelf labeled for His Majesty. You recognize the glow. It's the same elixir the apprentice was stirring earlier. Tomorrow it will ride up the steps in a velvet-lined box, carried by a steward who will bow and smile. The king will drink it before bed, with no idea that the gold he tastes is laced with the very thing that's unraveling him. You leave the lab and feel the cold air bite your lungs. It's a relief. You didn't realize how much you missed clean breath. You turn once more, looking back at the torchlit doorway, the soft clinking of glass fading behind you. That room was supposed to create miracles, but all it ever did was hasten funerals. And yet, no one ever calls it murder. They call it medicine. You walk slowly back toward the palace's eastern wing, the chill of the outer halls still clinging to your sleeves. Your mind circles, unable to let go of one thought. They truly believed in the philosopher's stone. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. They believed, with the sincerity of prayer and the fervor of superstition, that this elusive substance could not only turn base metals into gold, but also grant immortality. And that belief was so powerful, so consuming, that even emperors bankrolled the search. You picture the king you saw earlier, sipping from a poison-gilded goblet, and wonder what if he really thought he was drinking steps toward eternity, because to them, gold wasn't just wealth, it was incorruptibility. Gold never tarnished, never rusted. If only the body could be made the same. You turn into a smaller chamber, less ornate than the rest, lit by a single flickering sconce. This is where the royal alchemist keeps his most precious texts. They're not shelved like books, they're stacked like relics. Some are bound in leather, others wrapped in cloth, sealed with wax, tied with hair. Yes, hair. A common belief held that sealing a secret with part of your own body tied your soul to the success of the spell. You brush your fingers over one bundle and pause. There, scribbled in a tight, hurried hand, is a recipe lapidem philosophorum, prima pars. You unfold the cloth gently. The ingredients include calcined eggshell, red vitriol, dew collected before sunrise, and this is new powdered mummy bone. You blink. Apparently, that one came from a Venetian trader. You almost admire the confidence, almost, and yet, tucked between the lines of madness, there's method. They had an internal logic, strange but consistent. Heat purifies, metal transforms. The body, like the soul, can be refined. You lift another book, thicker, embossed with a faded sun and moon locked in embrace. Inside is a record of failed attempts, brews that boiled over, paste that solidified into bricks, tinctures that smelled so foul even rats abandoned the room. Each entry ends with a single word: retry. Not fail, not abandon, just retry. That's what made the search dangerous. Not the ingredients, the obsession. You begin to understand that the philosopher's stone wasn't just a tool, it was a mirror. Every attempt to create it was also an attempt to redeem something: poverty, illness, death, even the loss of a child. There's a note in the margin of one book that reads, "For Anne, who lived 5 days." No date, no surname, just that. You set the book down and breathe slowly. The stone may have been mythical, but the pain behind it was very real. Historians still argue whether alchemists truly sought to defy death, or if they were simply trying to delay it. Name it. Understand it. You lean toward the latter. Not even kings are immune to grief. The royal alchemist, whom you haven't seen tonight, left his mark everywhere. His notes, his mixtures, his obsessions. He once believed he was closer than any man before him. He claimed to have created the red tincture, the penultimate stage before the stone. When he presented it to the court, it shimmered like rubies, glowed faintly in candlelight, and smelled faintly of violets and vinegar. The king applauded. The queen wept. A servant drank a single drop. She collapsed within the hour, died by morning. The alchemist called it a setback. He left the palace 2 days later, disappeared into the forests of Burgundy, never to be seen again. Some say he was executed. Others whisper he did succeed, and left to protect mankind from his discovery. You're not sure which is more tragic. You sit by the window now, staring out over the silent courtyards, moonlight glinting off the copper roof tiles. In the distance, you hear the echo of hoofbeats, probably a messenger, or a physician summoned late. You imagine him carrying another vial, another cure, another dose of something meant to heal but brewed in ignorance. You wonder how many of these physicians and alchemists truly understood the substances they used. Antimony, arsenic, mercury. These weren't names of poisons then. They were stages on a journey. The noble metals purified the soul. The base ones carried sin. The alchemist's task wasn't just to create treasure, it was to cleanse the universe. You remember one more story, less known, rarely repeated. A certain duke, obsessed with alchemy, commissioned a private laboratory hidden in the cellars beneath his estate. He invited 3 alchemists from different countries, each claiming to hold the secret of the Red Lion, the penultimate reagent in the philosopher's stone process. One night, the lab exploded. Locals reported a flash of green light, a sound like a cathedral bell collapsing, and then nothing. When servants dug through the rubble, they found no bodies, only glass shards embedded in stone, twisted iron, and one lone pendant resting untouched in the center of the wreckage. It bore the sign of Mercury. The duke's name was never spoken again at court, but his wine was, because afterward, it tasted faintly metallic, and it sold remarkably well. You glance again at the texts around you, now aware that many were copied and recopied by hand, their formulas evolving like living things. One alchemist might remove a line, another might add a symbol, a third might hide the real recipe in footnotes or poetic riddles. It was a game, a trap, a legacy. You find a page marked only with a circle and a line through it, no writing, no title. But when you hold it up to the candlelight, faint etchings emerge, a human figure inside a flask, crowned, arms raised. Around him, the 4 classical elements: earth, water, air, fire. Below that, a word, rebis. You've read about this, the alchemical union of opposites, the final transformation, man and woman, gold and silver, body and spirit. The philosopher's stone wasn't a thing, it was balance. And now, you feel a subtle shift inside yourself. Not belief, exactly, but understanding. The alchemists weren't trying to poison kings. They were trying to create gods. The tragedy is that in their attempt to lift man higher, they fed him to the very substances they thought would elevate him. Gold for the heart, mercury for the mind, lead for the bones. And in the end, the body gave way before the soul could rise. You close the book gently and lean back. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls twice. Midnight, the hour most alchemists believed was ideal for transmutation. You wonder how many hands, in how many castles, now reach for flasks and scrolls. How many kings recline in silk beds, unaware that their elixir glows just a bit too brightly. You remember the violet goblet, the arsenic scroll, the powdered mummy bone. You remember the phrase from earlier retry. You realize it's still happening. Somewhere. Someone is still trying. You find yourself drifting back into the grand hallways of the castle, past tapestries that tell stories no one remembers, and stone statues that once held meaning, but now only watch. The scent shifts again, powdery, perfumed, faintly metallic. You follow it, curious, until you reach the antechamber of the queen. Her doors half open, her mirror still catching the candlelight, even though she's long since retired for the night. On the vanity before you is a collection of small jars, each delicately labeled in a flowing script. You lean in, Venetian white, ceruse of Rome, spirit of pearl. To the modern eye, it might look like a high-end cosmetics display, but you know better. You know these powders shimmer because they contain lead carbonate basic white lead, and they weren't made to wash off. They were designed to sink into the skin, to create that ghostly, perfect complexion the court adored. You pick up the jar of ceruse. The lid is crusted with residue. It smells faintly sweet, like almonds and chalk. The poison hides behind the perfume. You sit before the mirror and imagine being her, the queen, cloaked in brocade, powdered until her skin reflects like porcelain, her cheeks rouged with crushed cinnabar mercuric sulfide, rich and red and deadly. She believes in its beauty. She believes it hides her age, her weariness, her fading favor, and in many ways, it does. To the court, she glows, but you see the cost, the brittle nails, the ulcers around the mouth, the hairline receding beneath a velvet coif. Still, she applies it every day, ritualistically, religiously, convinced of its necessity. Historians still argue whether women at court truly understood how dangerous their beauty routines were, or whether they were too steeped in the traditions of powdered masks and white faces to ask questions. You suspect it's a mix of both. Fear of irrelevance is sometimes more powerful than fear of poison. The cosmetics aren't just applied to the face. A small bowl contains a thick white paste used for the neck and chest, carefully smoothed on with a fine brush made from swan feathers. The goal is uniformity. No blemishes, no freckles, no color that hints at peasant blood. You trace the brush's handle, then set it down gently. To your left, another box holds hair treatment oils mixed with vinegar, herbs, and lead salts to maintain that pale blonde tint once prized by nobility. The concoction burns. You can tell from the reddish smears on the comb, yet it's used anyway, daily, dutifully. It's not vanity, it's survival. There's more. A vial of eye drops labeled belladonna. You know what that means, deadly nightshade. Used to dilate pupils, create that wide-eyed, luminous gaze. One drop too many and the world tilts. 2, and vision blurs. 4, and breath becomes shallow. Still, the queen uses it. She wants her eyes to look like moons, soft and adoring. Her ladies-in-waiting imitate her. You picture them, seated in a row, dabbing poison into their eyes with slender glass droppers, smiling faintly through the sting. Their bodies adapt, or they don't. The court calls their fainting spells delicacy. You call it what it is: slow, intentional erasure. A maid enters quietly and begins tidying the space. You watch her hands, nimble and careful. She wears gloves thin linen, perhaps as much for ceremony as for safety. She doesn't meet your gaze. She lifts a jar, sniffs it slightly, and sets it aside. You wonder if she knows what's inside. Maybe, maybe not. But she knows the rules touch only what you must, clean what you can, and don't ask questions. The hierarchy of harm protects those at the top, but it never shields those who serve. You notice the pink at her fingertips, the rawness around her nails. The residue from these concoctions doesn't vanish. It lingers in cloth, in air, in the soft spaces under fingernails. A small book lies beside the mirror, Le Livre de Beauté Royale. Its pages are thin, gilded at the edges. Inside are beauty recipes, drawn from Greece, Rome, and Alexandria. They call for ground pearl, powdered coral, vinegar of lead, and once, disturbingly, bat guano mixed with honey. The tone is confident, authoritative. Every line reads like gospel, and who would dare question it? The queen follows it. So, the ladies do too, and soon, so does every noblewoman within the castle. You feel a chill crawl across your skin as you realize that beauty, here, is not an individual pursuit. It's a doctrine. Break it, and you're cast out. Obey it, and you decay slowly, gracefully, beneath a mask of radiance. One recipe catches your eye. For the freshness of youth, mix white lead, egg white, and rose water. Apply nightly. If skin peels, rejoice, it is proof of renewal. You pause. Peel is such a passive word. So is rejoice. You think of the queen's smile, tight, rehearsed, unwavering. Does she rejoice or does she simply endure? There's no way to know. Pain is so rarely mentioned in these texts. Only transformation, only glow. You spot a small silver spoon, etched with the royal crest. It's used for dosing powdered pearls into drinks. Another beauty habit believed to improve the skin and calm the nerves. Of course, pearls don't dissolve easily, so they were often ground with a bit of acid, sometimes lemon juice, sometimes something more. Persuasive. One such additive was lead acetate, sweet, soluble, and deadly. You lift the spoon and see a faint patina along the edge, a quiet sign of its misuse. You set it back gently and whisper, "She doesn't know." But then again, maybe she does. The door creaks and you step back, fading into the shadow as the queen returns. She doesn't see you. Her reflection catches her first. She approaches the mirror, studies herself in the dim light, then sits. She looks tired, not in the way of sleeplessness, but in the way of carrying too many masks. She opens her rouge jar, dips her finger, applies it to her cheeks with slow precision. You count each motion, 5 dabs per side. She then reaches for the ceruse, dabs a little more on her collarbone, then the belladonna. 1 drop, just 1. She waits. Her pupils bloom like ink on parchment. She breathes out slowly. "Perfect," she murmurs. You step away quietly, heart heavier than before. Historians still debate how much of this was fashion and how much was fear. Did these women cling to poison to hold their place, or did they believe, deep down, that beauty was virtue, and ugliness, a kind of moral failure? You don't have the answer. But as you leave the room, you carry the smell of violet powder and vinegar with you, a clinging ghost of elegance and death braided tightly together. You walk past other doors, now chambers of duchesses, ladies, and guests of noble blood. Their vanities look the same. Their powders differ only in shade. You realize that, while the king's poisons are often hidden in tinctures and goblets, the queen's poison sits proudly on display. It is celebrated, purchased, imitated, and it whispers the same promise each night: beauty forever, at any cost. And here's the unsettling thing: you get it. For a moment, you understand the allure, the glow, the control, the illusion of perfection in a world that offers no mercy for those who fade. You feel it pull at you too, because the most dangerous poisons aren't forced on people. They're chosen, joyfully, lovingly, every night before bed. That's what makes them stick. You turn from the queen's chamber and follow the marble hall down toward the physician's quarters, a narrow alcove between the chapel and the royal herbarium. It's colder here, quieter, thick, with the smell of camphor, beeswax, and something else you can't quite place at first. A faint ammonia note lingers in the air, sharp and unmistakable. You pause in front of a long wooden cabinet. On top of it sits a row of transparent flasks, each containing pale golden liquid. Labels dangle from thin string. His Grace, morning. Chancellor, after supper. Lady Blanche, nerves. But one catches your attention more than the others. Irina Regis, 3rd day. It's exactly what it sounds like. Royal urine, preserved, examined, and interpreted as though it were scripture. You don't laugh. You wouldn't dare. Because in this time, urine tells the truth no one else can. You lean in closer. The flask glows faintly in the candlelight. Pale and clouded, suspended particles swirl lazily as if they're considering what secrets to reveal. The physician, you learn, inspects this sample each morning by holding it up to the rising sun. Its color, texture, clarity, and even smell are compared to the great charts of uroscopy, ancient diagrams that link every shade of yellow to a different inner affliction. Pale gold, overindulgence in fish. Brownish tinge, excess color. Milky, the moon's fault. Red sediment might be divine retribution. You read the notes scribbled underneath. Too warm, slightly sweet. Pray for balance of bile. Historians still argue whether uroscopy ever produced meaningful diagnoses, or whether it was just a refined form of guessing dressed up with poetry and glass. But you see how seriously it's taken. There's even a tiny altar nearby, where a candle is lit each morning before the ritual. You realize this is no test, it's divination. You imagine the physician rising before dawn, muttering blessings as he gathers the flask. Careful not to disturb the sediment, he'll stare into it as if it were a crystal ball, then make bold recommendations about the king's soul. Perhaps a clove compress, perhaps bloodletting, perhaps a new alchemical draft that smells like rosemary and tastes like death. All of it comes from this little bottle of fluid filtered through intuition, astrology, and 1,000 years of contradictory theory. You watch him swirl another flask and pause. Ah, he mutters, the color of saffron, a pious king. You whisper, or a poisoned one. On the shelf below, you find a bundle of parchment, charts, meticulously drawn outlines of flasks, each marked with a different hue and diagnosis. The bottom corner of one reads, Chart of Humoral Flux for Noble Examinations. It's art, really sickeningly beautiful, in its effort to pin the body down to shades and metaphors. A separate note lies tucked beneath it. Avoid testing after asparagus or beetroot. You can't help it, you smile. Even in an age ruled by mysticism and metaphor, something still broke through. But the practice went further. Physicians weren't just reading fluids, they were reading status. If a royal's urine turned cloudy, it might be interpreted as a disturbance in the heavens or an omen of civil unrest. You see here a letter from a rival court, warning that a decline in the Lord's water may presage a decline in the people's obedience. That's not medicine. That's politics with a pipette. You begin to see how fragile this system really is, how quickly belief becomes doctrine, and doctrine becomes destiny. You picture a king's trembling hand extending a goblet, unaware that last night's potion is today's prophecy. You spot a second sealed flask, darker than the others. This one has a wax stopper and a ribbon around the neck. The tag simply reads, Postmortem. You stare at it a little longer than you should. This sample no longer whispers. It accuses. You feel it pressing against your mind. How many treatments had this king endured? How many balancing potions? How many harmonic enema broths? And still, in the end, all that remained was a flask and a guess. You turn it slightly in the light. Inside, a tiny speck floats at the bottom, almost like dust. But you know better. That's residue. From organs too taxed. From blood too burdened. A body not failed by nature, but by its keepers. Beside the flasks are tools simple but chilling. A long glass siphon for transferring liquid. A narrow spoon for sediment analysis. A tiny grater used to sprinkle powdered herbs directly into the sample, to see if they reacted visibly. One note reads, Sage will hiss if the bile is corrupted. You scoff, but only briefly, because you remember how long these rituals have ruled. You remember that kings and queens lived and died by what floated in a bottle, and you remember that these bottles were rarely questioned, only replaced. Across the table lies a leather-bound ledger. You flip it open carefully. Inside are daily logs of the king's bodily outputs. It's absurd, at first until it's not. The entries track volume, color, timing, even dream reports, pale yellow upon waking, mild dizziness, dreamt of running wolves, prescribed infusion of fennel and mercury. There's a rhythm to it, like a calendar made of the body. You wonder who had to collect the sample. A squire, a servant, a priest. Whoever it was, they wrote with devotion. You see little flourishes in the handwriting, a care that borders on tenderness. At the back of the room is a rack of older samples, faded, dusty, neglected. Some are from nobles long dead, others from guests and foreign emissaries. One is labeled only with a symbol, a circle with 2 dots inside. You recognize it as the royal alchemist's seal, his sample, or one of his experiments. You don't dare open it, but you feel its weight. You realize that every person in this castle leaves something behind, and most of it is stored in flasks. You exit the physician's quarters slowly, mind swimming. The idea that health could be so gently misinterpreted, so elegantly misdiagnosed, leaves a strange taste in your mouth. Not bitter, not sweet, just hollow. You walk past a stained glass window depicting the four temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, each one dressed in regal colors, each one holding a flask. You think of the queen's powdered skin, the king's golden tincture, the servant who died with a red tongue. It all begins to blur. And then you remember this wasn't fringe. This was normal. This was science, as they knew it. It was practiced by scholars and priests, ratified by stars and sanctified by scripture. No one questioned the physician's charts. They questioned the urine. The body was wrong. The method was holy. You stop beside a narrow window. Feel the night air drifting in. It carries the scent of thyme and wet stone. You close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a physician is preparing tomorrow's reading. Another flask, another future, another guess. And here's the strange comfort of it all. People meant well. They wanted to help. They wanted to heal. They studied. They prayed. They tested. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone got better. Not because of the medicine, but in spite of it. But they remembered the ritual, not the recovery. And so it continued. You walk on, passing rooms with closed doors and quiet secrets. Behind one, a noblewoman mutters in sleep. Behind another, a baby cries softly, each one part of the same system, each one destined to be diagnosed not by what they say or feel, but by what drips from their body and how it dances in the light. You wonder, just briefly, what your own flask would reveal. You drift now toward the castle's feasting hall, where tapestries of hunts and conquests hang like silent spectators over long oak tables slick with polish and time. It's past the hour of dining, but the smell of roasted meats, candied fruits, and mulled wine still lingers in the wood, as if the walls themselves have absorbed centuries of celebration. The table is set as if frozen mid-bite goblets tipped, platters half covered with linen, a bowl of stewed quince left untouched at the far end. You sit, just for a moment, and imagine the feast in full swing, laughter echoing, forks clinking, a minstrel humming somewhere near the hearth, and then you imagine what's inside the food. You glance down at a glistening sweet roll, its sheen unnaturally perfect. You recognize it immediately. That glow, that seductive gloss. It's not just sugar. It's sugar of lead, also known as lead acetate. Once a prized culinary secret in medieval kitchens, sweet, soluble, and deadly. You feel your mouth go dry as you imagine the royal baker dipping dried figs in a syrup made from boiled grape juice and thin shavings of lead. The result, ambrosia, or so it seemed. The flavor was smoother, the sweetness rounder, but the aftermath, headaches, fatigue, trembling fingers. Still, the court adored it, especially the nobility, who insisted that such rare confections were a symbol of refinement. The irony, of course, is that the peasants, those coarse eaters of onions and barley, lived longer simply because they couldn't afford poison. You think back to the kitchens you passed earlier. You recall the scullery maid scrubbing pewter plates with vinegar, unknowingly accelerating the leaching of metals into every morsel. Historians still debate whether royal cooks knew what they were doing, or if they too were caught in the glitter of their own craft. Perhaps, as with the alchemists, the pursuit of perfection left no room for caution. At the center of the table rests a grand pitcher of spiced wine. It's heavy, ornate, lined with pewter and rimmed in silver. The wine within has steeped overnight with cinnamon, cloves, orange peel, and a small quantity of litharge, a form of lead oxide once used to clarify liquids. Yes, clarify. You almost laugh. Clarity in the mouth, confusion in the brain. That's the trade-off. And no one seems to mind, because nothing says opulence like a drink that shines in candlelight and burns slightly on the way down. You lift the lid, peer inside. The scent is intoxicating. You feel its pull even now, centuries removed. You set it down gently, hands trembling. A small dish near the pitcher contains candied violets and sugared rose petals, delicate, beautiful, and dusted with white powder. Not sugar, not flour, but tin ash, collected from the edges of baking trays. It gave the petals a silvery finish that caught the torchlight. Guests would pop them into their mouths between courses, unaware that the soft crunch was scraping their insides with every bite. You think of the children seated at the end of the table, mimicking their parents, learning the rituals of consumption without understanding the price. Poison wasn't reserved for enemies, it was part of the menu. And then you notice the salt, a simple bowl carved from alabaster, containing a powder so fine it could have been mistaken for flour. But this isn't sodium chloride, it's lead chloride, used in some households as a medicinal seasoning believed to calm the stomach, sprinkled over meats, stirred into soups, especially during Lent, when fish became the staple and cooks leaned heavily on preservative salts to extend freshness. Of course, those same salts also built up in the bloodstream over time, causing what the old records vaguely called the palsy of the jaw or the wasting cough. The accounts never blamed the seasoning. They blamed the air, or the stars, or sin. You shift in your seat and imagine the guest returning rosy-cheeked, silk-clad, bearing laughter and secret feuds in equal measure. The bishop would bless the food, the steward would announce each dish, the almoner would pass quietly, eyes scanning for signs of gluttony, and then they would feast. Bread dipped in gold-flecked oils, stewed eels in copper pots, pies stuffed with sparrow, veal, and cloves and lined with pastry crusts baked on pewter sheets. You picture the queen sipping her spiced wine, the king cutting into his roast with a blade polished in mercury. The room would glow with warmth and laughter, and somewhere, quietly, someone would begin to sweat. Symptoms never came quickly. That's the trick of it. The feast never killed anyone mid-bite. It waited. A dull ache in the morning, a sour stomach, a shaking hand, blamed on indulgence, on cold drafts, on excess bile. And so the same foods returned, again and again, night after night, until the symptoms became permanent and the decline irreversible. You remember a chronicle that mentioned a duke who, in his final days, spoke only in whispers and forgot the names of his own sons. They said he had the royal frailty. No one suspected the venison stew. You rise and walk the length of the hall, running your fingers along the carved edges of the chairs. Each one is engraved with the crest of a different house. You recognize some. Others have long since vanished. You wonder how many of them fell to war and how many to the feast. A servant enters silently, a boy no older than 12, carrying a cloth to polish the goblets. He works quickly, precisely, dipping the cloth in vinegar and scrubbing the inside of each cup. You watch, your stomach sinking. The vinegar reacts instantly with any residual lead, drawing it out, enhancing its absorption the next time the cup is used. He doesn't know. He just wants to do his job well. Nearby, a dog lies curled by the hearth, nose twitching in sleep. You remember stories of castle hounds mysteriously falling ill after licking spilled wine or gnawing on discarded scraps. Their deaths were always sudden, violent, dismissed as bad meat or disease. You imagine one such hound, bloated and twitching on the floor, while courtiers step over him to reach the mulled cider. No one connects the dots. Why would they? The dog can't speak. You pause beside a tapestry depicting a harvest festival, baskets of figs, apples, and plums, all fruits often preserved in lead-glazed jars, admired for their sparkle. The jars themselves were works of art, but inside the same slow undoing, the richer the glaze, the greater the danger. You think of how many lords gifted such jars to each other, proud of their craftsmanship. They'd send them by courier, wrapped in silk, with notes that read, "For your table, from mine." You wonder how many deaths arrived with those gifts, unwrapped over laughter and trust. The banquet hall is quiet now. The torches flicker. You stand alone among the ruins of indulgence, surrounded not by ghosts, but by the evidence of their choices. Every dish a betrayal, every goblet a loaded die, and still they returned, night after night, because the food was good, the wine was sweet, the laughter was real. That's the part that lingers, not the poison, the joy. That's what made it all so hard to resist. And maybe, you think, that's the most human thing of all, to sit at the table, knowing something might be wrong, and eat anyway, because it's tradition, because it's beautiful, because it's shared. You step away from the table, eyes scanning the glittering remnants of the feast. You wonder if you could have resisted it, and then, softly, you admit probably not. You make your way from the feasting hall toward the upper balconies, where the air grows scented again, not of roasted meats this time, but something more ethereal. Musk, frankincense, violet resin, lavender oil soaked into tapestries. This is the domain of courtly elegance, where scent isn't just an indulgence, it's identity. Each noble wears a fragrance tailored not just to fashion, but to astrology, temperament, even rank. You inhale, and it's dizzying. Not overwhelming, not foul, just dense, like walking through someone else's memory. And that's when it hits you. Scent here is not passive, it's performed, applied, distilled, burned. You pass through a narrow corridor and step into the perfumery, a room lined with copper stills, ceramic burners, and jars labeled in fading Latin script. One reads Oleum Rosmarini, another Balsamum Peruvi, but then your eyes catch others Aqua Mercurialis, Oleum Arsenici. You freeze. They're not just distilling flowers, they're distilling metal, and they're breathing it in. The court's obsession with aromatic air had reason, with pestilence and rot lurking in every corner of medieval life. Fragrance was believed to ward off not just stench, but disease itself. If a room smelled pleasant, it was safe. That was the logic. So courtiers lit incense daily, not gently, but in great clouds of smoldering white that curled through draperies and clung to clothing. You pass by a censer still warm, its bowl lined with crushed herbs and metal ash. When it burned, it released not just fragrance, but vapors of mercury and arsenic thought to purify the spirit. Instead, they soaked into lungs. You pick up a charred cone of incense. It's heavy, oily to the touch. You set it down, wiping your fingers on your sleeve, then think better of it. You remember what you just handled. A servant enters carrying a tray of oils and gently starts arranging them on a shelf, one for the queen's chambers, another for the bishop's desk, a third marked simply with a symbol you recognize from the Alchemist's text, a triangle pierced by a line, sulfur. You watch as the servant pours a few drops into a clay diffuser, then lights the taper beneath. Almost instantly, a floral note fills the room. Rose, orange peel, musk. It's lovely. But you can feel your throat tightening, because mixed within is camphor and a trace of aquafortis nitric acid in solution, used to brighten the perfume's throw. You turn slightly and spot a scroll on the shelf titled De Aris Curatio, on the healing of air. It outlines recipes for cleansing rooms of corruption, especially during outbreaks. One method includes boiling vinegar, garlic, and lead filings over a low flame and allowing the vapors to circulate. You breathe through your mouth and step back. Historians still argue whether the perfumers of the time knew the risks of their ingredients. Some say they relied on ancient recipes inherited blindly. Others believe they recognized certain side effects but considered them proof the mixtures were working. A burning throat meant purification. Dizziness meant the bad humors were rising. Headaches were a natural byproduct of spiritual alignment. You find it hard to decide which explanation is worse. You move toward the window and crack it open slightly, letting in a sliver of clean air. It's the first breath in minutes that doesn't taste like history. On a nearby table rests a ledger with a list of scent commissions. Nobles ordered perfumes as gifts, as tools, even as weapons. One countess requested a blend to be worn at a rival's wedding to ensure misfortune. The recipe includes rue, nightshade, and a touch of verdigris scraped from copper goblets. Another order, a king's signature cologne, to be applied before diplomacy. It contained ambergris, cedar, and mercury tincture, applied directly to the skin, daily. You imagine him shaking hands with envoys, forehead glistening, the scent of diplomacy clinging to every gesture. You wonder how long it took before the tremors started. The royal chapel used incense differently ritually, reverently. Every mass began with the lighting of censers filled with a mixture of frankincense, crushed rose petals, and sometimes orpiment, a vivid yellow arsenic sulfide used for both pigment and purification. The priest waved the smoke toward the altar, the choir, the king. No one questioned it. The cloud itself became holy. But you know better now. That smoke didn't bless it buried. It seeped into cloth, into lungs, into the stone of the chapel itself. You glanced down at the marble floor, faintly yellowed near the altar. Years of devotion, and just as many of quiet damage. You turned toward a set of shelves holding aromatics used to scent gloves, a fashionable, courtly practice. Gloves were soaked in floral oils, dried with powders, and sometimes laced with musk and ambergris. But the more powerful the wearer, the stronger the scent and the stronger the chemical. Gloves belonging to the king's mistress were said to leave behind a trace fragrance that lingered for hours. The recipe: lavender, clove, and turpentine mineral, a preparation of mercury chloride. It was absorbed through the skin, lightheadedness, heart palpitations, vision blur, all called the fever of romance. You laugh softly, then stop. It's too close to horror. A glass vial catches the light beside you, revealing a thick, opalescent liquid. You uncork it gently and catch a sudden burst of violet, lemon, and something metallic. The label reads simply, Vaporum Regium, the royal vapor, meant to be worn as a pendant, opened discreetly before entering crowded halls. The idea was that it would cleanse the air directly around the wearer's face. Its ingredients: alcohol, herbs, and sublimate of mercury. Carried like a charm, trusted like armor. You place the vial back, vision blurring slightly at the edges. There's a drawer beneath the perfumery table. You pull it open. Inside lie small sachets, embroidered cloth bags filled with dried herbs, worn at the waist or around the neck. They're fragrant still: cinnamon, bay, wormwood. But one, marked with a faded ribbon, has a strange scent, sweet and sharp. Inside, dried petals mingle with powdery green crystals. You don't need to taste it to know. That's verdigris, scraped from weathered bronze, used to prevent plague. Also known to induce vomiting, ulcers, and kidney failure. Yet every noblewoman wore one, layered between silk and lace, close to the heart. You glance again at the walls. They're stained from centuries of smoke. The scent is baked in now, part of the structure. You wonder if the castle will ever forget these smells, if the stone itself dreams of violet and arsenic. And still, the court demands more. The next shipment of sandalwood arrives tomorrow, along with fresh musk from the east, and a new batch of tincture ordered for the queen's pillows. To help her sleep, poppy oil mixed with camphor and a whisper of belladonna, just enough to still the mind, not enough to silence it forever, hopefully. You walk back through the chamber one last time. The air is thick, fragrant, intoxicating, and as you pass through it, you understand something quiet and sad. These weren't just scents, they were signals of wealth, of purity, of divine favor, of power. To not wear them was to seem common, vulnerable, less, and so people endured the headaches, the nausea, the trembling hands. They told themselves it was working, that the scent meant they were safe. You step out into the corridor again, letting the cool night wrap around you like a clean sheet. You breathe deep. For once, it doesn't hurt. And you wonder how many people spent their whole lives trying to smell beautiful, while their bodies cried out underneath. How many kings lay in fragrant beds, their lungs tight with invisible clouds. How many queens powdered arsenic on their wrists to smell like roses when they hugged their children goodnight. You don't know, but you suspect the answer is too many. You return to the quieter halls of the palace, where tapestries no longer tell stories, and the torchlight dims as if respecting what was lost here. You follow a corridor lined with painted portraits: alchemists, scholars, the occasional noble posed with a flask or a crucible, each one gazing proudly into the future they never lived to see. Their robes shimmer with faded pigment, some of it likely mixed with crushed minerals now known to be carcinogenic. Still, their expressions beam with faith in their experiments. One figure in particular catches your eye: an older man with soft eyes, holding a red glass vial at chest height. Beneath the frame, a plaque reads simply, Frater Arno, Alchemist to the Crown, 1391-1402. You know that name. You heard it whispered in the kitchens, muttered by the steward when wine shipments arrived late. Arno, the king's favorite alchemist, who vanished overnight. You descend a stairwell seldom used, where damp air presses against your cheeks and the walls feel closer together. At the bottom, a heavy door bars your way, but it's unlatched. You push it open into a chamber long abandoned. This was Arno's private lab. Unlike the others you've seen, this one isn't cluttered with beakers and glowing concoctions. It's orderly, minimalist, clean lines of glass instruments, copper coils coiled neatly, notes arranged by color and script. You walk slowly, reverently. There's a sense of intentional absence here, like someone left not in a hurry, but with finality. On the desk lies a letter, yellowed but intact, addressed to no one. You read it aloud, barely a whisper. It worked, but it should not have. I have sealed the last vial. Do not open it. I go now where no crown can follow. There's no signature, just a blot where the ink bled and dried. You step back, breath caught somewhere between awe and dread. Historians still argue whether Arno fled because of failure or success. Some say he created the Philosopher's Stone and feared what it would bring. Others insist he poisoned the king, accidentally or otherwise, and disappeared before judgment arrived. But this room doesn't feel like the lair of a criminal. It feels like a confession. You approach the shelf where the so-called last vial rests, still sealed with wax and marked with a symbol you don't recognize, a circle within a triangle, with a single diagonal slash. You don't touch it. You just look. It doesn't glow. It doesn't hum. It simply waits. That's worse. In the corner of the room sits a box, locked and iron-bound. Its lid bears the same symbol, carved deep. Nearby lies a journal, Arno's final entries. You read through lines that begin with confidence notes about gold extraction, lunar cycles, success with antimony refinement, but they gradually devolve into something colder. The king sleeps longer. He no longer remembers the songs we played. I see the colors behind my eyelids now, even when I close my eyes to pray. There are sketches, eyes surrounded by fire, hands reaching from crucibles, a crown melting into a pool of dark water. The handwriting becomes erratic, then steadies, then disappears altogether. You sit at the desk, the candlelight flickering over parchment, and try to piece together what happened. Arno was beloved. The king trusted him more than the bishop, more than the physician. His elixirs were considered miracles. One cured a chronic cough, another restored a nobleman's sight for a full year. People spoke of him as a saint. And then, without warning, the king fell ill not with fever, but with fog. He began forgetting names, confusing seasons, mistaking day for night. Arno insisted it was temporary. But then the queen grew weak. Her fingers trembled. Her sleep deepened into silence. Arno's chambers were searched. They found nothing except that one vial. No one opened it, but Arno was gone by morning. The irony is almost too cruel. The man who came closest to curing death may have caused it, not through malice, but through method. You look at the ingredients listed in one of the entries: white arsenic, gold leaf, vinegar of lead, the blood of a dove slain under a waxing moon. You wince. The components of legend, the recipe of disaster. You wonder, did he really think it would work? Or was it just hope, pushed to the edge of reason? The more you read, the clearer it becomes. Arno didn't flee in fear. He left because he realized the truth, that what he made wasn't a philosopher's stone, it was a philosopher's mirror, and it reflected something terrible. You walk the perimeter of the lab, brushing your hand over shelves thick with dust. One holds vials of residue, some cracked, some sealed. Their contents are dried now, but you recognize the names Crocus metallorum, Calx viva, Spiritus vini rectificatus. All parts of the process, all carriers of risk. Arno wasn't reckless. He was methodical. But even method has limits. You find a scrap of paper tucked beneath the stone. The king smiled as he drank. That was the worst of it. You fold it gently and place it back. In one corner, a table stands untouched. A single goblet rests atop it, etched with the royal seal. It's cracked. A dark ring stains the inside. You lean close. The scent is faint, but it's there, something metallic, sweet, and bitter all at once. You wonder if this was the cup, the one that changed everything. You wonder if Arno looked into it before he poured, if he hesitated, if he prayed. You hope he did. It would be worse if he didn't. On a high shelf rests a small leather satchel. Inside are dried herbs, labeled in Latin and Greek. Some you recognize: valerian, mandrake, wormwood. Others you don't. One is marked simply Umbra Vitae, shadow of life. You don't open it. You already know. Whatever lies inside was meant for something final. Not healing, not transmutation, but escape, or perhaps penance. You exit the lab slowly, leaving everything as it was. The air feels heavier now, not just with dust or decay, but with understanding. You retrace your steps up the narrow stairs, back to the light of the corridor. You look again at the portrait of Arno. The eyes are kinder than you remembered. Not prideful, not triumphant, just tired. You nod to him, almost without meaning to, and walk on. Back in the main halls, the whispers about Arno persist. Some say he became a hermit in the Pyrenees, where he continued his work in secret. Others claim he drowned himself in a silver mine, hoping to merge with the metal he once worshipped. A few even believe he found the stone and ascended body and spirit transformed into pure light. But you've seen the lab. You've read the notes. You know the truth is far less magical. He left because he could no longer trust his own hands, and that, perhaps, is the true end of every alchemist's journey. Not gold, not immortality, but silence. The silence of understanding what you've done, what you can't undo, and what must never be tried again. You pass through a side hall now, the light thinning as torches sputter. Somewhere, another alchemist begins mixing a new solution. Somewhere, another ruler dreams of eternal strength in a cup. And somewhere, that final vial still waits untouched, unseen, but not forgotten. You move now through the deeper stone corridors where the boundaries between medicine, superstition, and alchemy blur into something even stranger, where the line between remedy and ritual becomes too thin to trust. Here, near the cloisters of the palace's inner sanctum, you come across a chamber where old tools of healing lie quietly under linen sheets, like relics in a forgotten chapel. You step inside. The air is cold, stale, with a bite of vinegar, crushed mint, and something unmistakably acidic. This was once a space for the extraction of maladies, a polite way of describing a medieval form of toxicology, which was, in practice, part science, part spectacle, and part desperation. You look around and realize this is where they tried to understand what killed someone, if they even noticed they'd been killed at all. A long bench holds rows of containers, each labeled with neat, looping script: blood of the Duke, taken postprandial, remains of broth served to her grace, vomit, third hour, dark red. You pause. That last one is dried now, crusted along the rim of a shallow silver basin, as if still waiting to be interpreted. Medieval toxicology, such as it was, often relied on nothing more than sight, smell, and superstition. If vomit burned the skin, it must be arsenic. If it had the sheen of oil, perhaps it was aconite. But nothing was definitive. Diagnosis? Here was performance. You crouch near a parchment tacked to the wall. It outlines a method for detecting poison by feeding scraps of the suspect meal to a rooster and waiting overnight. If the rooster dies, guilt is assumed. If it lives, the question is never fully settled. You whisper to yourself, not exactly peer-reviewed. The idea that one could identify poison through ritual test wasn't just hopeful, it was mandatory. If a king died, someone had to be blamed. A chef, a servant, a rival house, sometimes even the stars. You pick up a bronze ladle from the corner of the room. Its bowl is blackened, and the handle is scorched. Beneath it, a note used in the trial of Lord Reginald, year 1407. The legend goes that Reginald's soup was laced with white lead, but the real clue, according to court records, was that he had convulsions during the credo and bit off the tip of his tongue. The court astrologer blamed a malefic conjunction of Mars and Saturn. The cook was hanged anyway. You find a scroll rolled tightly and tied with blue twine. It's a compilation of poison identification signs: the black tongue, blue lips, sweating with cold skin, mad laughter, and sudden silence after eating. The irony is sharp. Nearly all these symptoms overlap with common illness, alcohol, or stress, and so the task of identifying poisoning often fell to those least equipped to see it. You imagine a scene now, a young noble doubled over in the great hall, eyes wide, lips trembling. Around him, courtiers panic, some pray, some step back, and one, usually the alchemist, steps forward. He smells the man's breath. He listens for strange rhythms. Then he announces, "It is venom of Saturn," meaning lead. The man dies hours later. The alchemist is promoted. You walk toward a smaller side table covered in powdered substances. You recognize some antimony, orpiment, verdigris, but others are less familiar: dragon's resin, black snow, powder of the Pope's curse. These weren't poisons so much as scapegoats. Whenever a sudden death occurred with no visible wound, suspicion turned to these powders, some real, many invented, all feared. You pick up a small bottle with a wax-sealed lid and a symbol burned into the side, a skull with a crown. Inside is a fine gray dust. A note reads, "Blown into the Duke's chamber through a hollow reed." Whether it worked doesn't matter. The idea did. Medieval courts were hotbeds of rumor and paranoia. A cough could mean illness, or it could mean betrayal. That's why so many nobles wore charms and drank daily antidotes brewed from increasingly absurd ingredients. You find one such antidote listed here: to prevent the taking of poison, take 1 bezoar. Mixed with unicorn horn, ground pearls, and the sweat of a virgin goat. You blink, you look again. The notes claim it was effective. Of course it does. The noble who drank it died 2 weeks later. But of melancholy, not poison. Convenient. In one dusty drawer, you discover a collection of dried plants: belladonna, hemlock, wolfsbane, all labeled meticulously, all once used in minute doses to build up poison resistance in the body. The practice, known as Mithridatism, was named after King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who supposedly ingested small doses of poison daily to immunize himself. The idea took hold in royal courts like wildfire. Kings and queens swallowed tiny portions of known toxins each morning, chasing an illusion of invincibility. But unlike Mithridates, they lacked accurate measurement. They didn't have chemistry, they had hope and a shaky hand. You imagine the king at dawn, his breath still thick with wine, sipping a vial containing trace arsenic and mercury, whispering a prayer, then hoping the taste didn't linger too long. You stand now before a case containing talismans, amber pendants, iron nails wrapped in linen, crushed sapphires embedded in beeswax. Each was meant to draw out venom from the body when worn against the skin. The concept was simple poison, like evil, could be pulled away with the right object and the right faith. One amulet bears a faint inscription, Contra Venenum Regis, against the king's poison. You wonder if he ever wore it. You wonder if it worked. You suspect he did, and you know it didn't. The most fascinating and disturbing part of this chamber lies along the far wall, a shelf labeled Testes Viventes, living trials. It holds records of animals used in poison testing: dogs, cats, even monkeys imported at great expense. The records are blunt. Dog expired in 9 minutes. Monkey vomited twice, recovered, later died. The goal was never true safety. It was risk reduction dressed in the language of experimentation. You run your finger along a line of cages now empty. The straw inside long rotted away. You imagine the sounds, the fear, the silence after. You find a final scroll tucked beneath the table, partially burned. It tells of an unnamed nobleman who, after suspecting his wife of treachery, began dosing her food with tinctures meant to test her health. When she grew paler, he increased the dose, believing the alchemical preparation was extracting some hidden corruption. She died in her sleep. The death was ruled a failure of the womb. The nobleman remarried 2 months later. You close the scroll and say nothing. There's nothing left to say. And here's the strangest part of this place: it's not a dungeon. It's not dark in malice. It was built with the best intentions. To protect, to understand, to cure. The shelves are neat, the labels careful, the notes are written with love, or something close to it. But poison doesn't care about motive. It works regardless. You turn to leave, heart heavy with the knowledge that most who entered this room did so because they believed in healing, and left only with questions. As you walk away, your thoughts swirl. You wonder how many royals were buried with the wrong cause of death etched into marble. How many physicians took credit for cures that were really coincidences. How many alchemists stirred one drop too much and smiled anyway, convinced they were close. You pass back through the stone corridor. The air tastes cleaner now, or maybe it just tastes empty. You're not sure which is worse. You leave the chamber of poisons and enter a corridor that grows colder with each step, where daylight disappears completely, and the stone walls seem to absorb every sound. A pair of heavy oak doors looms ahead, each carved with the image of a long-beaked mask, two mirrored plague doctors, noses extended like bird skulls, eyes hollow and watching. You know what's behind them. The ward, the last place the sick were brought when all else had failed. You push one door open and step into a room lined with cots, the smell of mildew, vinegar, and dried herbs still lingering in the air, long dormant. Yet the air doesn't feel dead, just waiting. As your eyes adjust, the details emerge: leather aprons hanging from hooks, glass bottles neatly arranged, a ledger left open on a desk, quills snapped in two, and there, near the back, the coat and mask of the plague doctor, hung like a shroud. You move toward it slowly, as if the air itself resists your presence. The mask is familiar to you, iconic now, even comical in modern memory. But here, in the silence of this room, it's anything but. The beaked mask was filled with herbs: lavender, myrrh, mint, and sometimes even crushed camphor or cloves intended to filter the air, to guard the physician from miasma, the invisible foulness thought to carry disease. The truth, of course, is that the mask filtered very little. It was porous, imperfect, a performance of protection. You lift the mask gently, its leather stiff with age. The inside is stained. The edge where lips once pressed smells faintly of old vinegar and sweat. This was the closest thing to a hazmat suit they had, and it failed. You imagine the doctor now, standing at the threshold of a noble's chamber, tools in hand, a cane to prod at bodies from a safe distance, his breath shallow behind the mask. He moves forward slowly, checking for the telltale signs: blackened swellings, bleeding gums, fevered eyes. He administers the usual garlic pastes, bloodletting, rose vinegar compresses. If the patient is royal, he adds ground sapphire or distilled theriac, an ancient antidote made from over 60 ingredients, including opium, cinnamon, and viper flesh. The irony is sharp. The more important the patient, the more complicated the cure, and the more likely it is to kill them faster. The tools are still here: scalpels, forceps, glass syringes, crude but recognizable, each one soaked in vinegar after use, sometimes flame sterilized over the hearth. The notes next to them list treatments by case: March 9th, high fever, treated with leeches and powdered pearl. March 11th, buboes lanced, patient expired overnight. March 14th, royal footman administered infusion of wormwood and sulfur, convulsed, deceased. You sit for a moment beside one of the cots, the sheets still neatly folded, though no one has slept here in centuries. You can almost hear the echo of coughing, the hurried footsteps, the quiet prayers whispered into linens. Historians still debate how effective the plague doctors really were. Some call them charlatans, others desperate heroes. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the exhaustion between. These were men who walked daily into rooms no one else dared enter, armed with guesswork and herbs. They thought the plague was carried by bad air miasma, and so they burned incense in great bowls, creating clouds so thick you could barely see. But incense made from mercury or arsenic-laced powders did little more than poison the lungs of the healthy. You find a scorched bowl in the corner, flecks of ash still clinging to the bottom. The rim is etched with the word Salus Health. You whisper it back, just once, and it dies in the air. A second mask sits beneath the cot, smaller, as if made for a child or perhaps a servant. You feel a shiver. No one was spared. Nobility didn't grant immunity. Royal physicians were the first to fall overexposed, overworked, overwhelmed. The king himself, terrified of death, once ordered the construction of a special air filtration chamber, A room filled with rose petals, copper coils, and a fan powered by servants. It was meant to purify every breath. It didn't work. He caught the fever anyway, and in a final act of belief, or perhaps delusion, he ordered one last dose of his favorite tonic wine, mixed with powdered coral, poppy extract, and a shaving of unicorn horn. He died the next morning. You walk along the ward's perimeter and find a chest filled with sachets, small cloth pouches meant to hang around the neck. Each is filled with dried herbs, spices, even powdered gems. One reads, Contra Pestum, another simply, protection. But what's striking is the note pinned beside them, use sparingly. Overexposure causes fainting. The instructions suggest rotating between sachets to avoid heat of the brain. You raise an eyebrow. The perfumes meant to guard against the plague may have done more harm than good. You imagine a noble collapsing from mercury exposure, mistaken for pestilence. He is quarantined, left to worsen, and in the end, the very charm meant to protect him finishes the work the plague never started. A logbook near the window reveals something stranger, still a record of recovered patients who later grew ill again, this time with symptoms not tied to plague, but to treatments, swelling of the limbs, blackened gums, blindness. The entries are tentative, possibly due to imbalance of humors, maybe lunar influence, but one line stands out, re-examine tincture. Presence of verdigris suspected, you feel your pulse quicken. Even then, they began to suspect. Even then, the alchemist's touch hovered behind the physician's decisions. But without another framework, without a science that could truly test and prove, they had no choice but to trust the ritual, and the ritual betrayed them. In the final alcove of the ward stands a table covered in wax tablets, each used to track symptoms day by day. You run your hand across one and feel the deep scratches where someone pressed too hard. The entry reads, still coughing, eyes dull, refuses broth. The next line is messier, gave rose tincture, no change. Then, faint gone. That's all. One word. No grand farewell. No ceremony. Just gone. You look out the narrow window slit, where the wind rustles dry leaves. You imagine how many were carted away, nameless, remembered only by the scratches they left behind. You step back toward the mask, still hanging from its hook. You want to put it on, just once, to see what the world looked like through its hollow eyes. But you don't. You've already seen enough. You walk toward the door and pause one last time. Above the exit is a faded inscription, nearly illegible. You strain to read it. Fide, non visu, trust, not sight. You exhale. That, in a way, defines the entire era. Faith over proof, scent over substance, symbol over science. And yet, within all that error, there was intention. There was care. The plague doctor didn't know his mask leaked. He just knew that someone had to walk into the room. As you leave the ward, you carry that image with you, the long-beaked figure surrounded by smoke, stepping forward not with certainty, but with conviction. The tools may have failed, the knowledge may have been flawed, but the gesture mattered. Even poison, when paired with hope, can wear a mask of compassion. You pass once more into the higher levels of the castle, where sunlight filters through narrow windows and the dust hangs motionless in its path, suspended like memory. This part of the fortress feels different, lighter, almost deceptive in its calm. But as you trace your fingers along the edge of a stained glass window, you begin to notice something else. Your fingertips come away gritty. You look closer. The glass isn't just colored, it's poisoned. The cobalt blues, the ruby reds, the bright yellows that have dazzled worshippers and courtiers alike for generations were forged not merely with artistry, but with compounds now listed under hazard labels. The color in the glass came from arsenic, lead, antimony, and manganese mixed in powdered form, heated in open furnaces, inhaled by artisans who believed the vividness of their craft justified any discomfort. You squint through the deep crimson pane depicting Saint Sebastian pierced with arrows, and for a moment the light shimmers so brilliantly it hurts your eyes. You step back. Maybe it's the angle, or maybe the pigment is still reaching out. You walk along the corridor and into the solar, the common room where royals spent their afternoons beneath windows meant to uplift and inspire. The furniture here is carved and heavy, Cushions embroidered with silver thread decorate the benches, but it's the glass. Again, that draws you. The goblets on the table, the wine decanters by the wall, all blown in the same brilliant hues as the chapel windows. You pick one up. It's cool and smooth, beautiful in a way only something handmade can be. But look closer, and you'll find a fine white frost around the rim. Lead oxide, leaching out slowly over years of use, drawn forth by wine, vinegar, or heat. The very vessels that graced royal feasts were quietly delivering illness, and no one noticed. Or worse, no one questioned. You run a finger along the inner curve of a decanter and find more residue. Just a whisper of it, but it's enough. In an age without understanding of chemical leaching, the dangers were invisible. Beautiful glass equaled wealth, and wealth meant health. So the glasses grew thicker, brighter, more saturated in color, and heavier with toxic metals. Some were so prized they were passed down as heirlooms, admired for their shimmer, unaware of the harm they carried. Historians still argue whether glaziers and glassmakers suspected the effects of their own art. Some accounts mention breathing difficulties, odd skin rashes, madness, but these were written off as curses, fate, the price of mastery. You sit by the window and imagine a young prince sipping herbal tea laced with honey from one of these goblets. He's pale, delicate, and always tired. The court says he is sensitive, melancholic by nature. They feed him more tonics, more tinctures. They switch to healthier glass, a newer batch with even more color, more brilliance, more pride, and over time, his hands tremble. He forgets words. He collapses during a music lesson and cannot remember the name of his instrument. But no one blames the cup. They blame the wind, the stars, the blood. Not far from the solar is the glass gallery, a hallway built to showcase imported Venetian glass, considered the finest in all of Europe. You walk its length slowly, surrounded by fragile sculptures and glittering decanters on pedestals. Each piece is a marvel etched with gold, shaped like flowers or serpents, some with flecks of mica that catch the light. You know now that many of these pieces are laced with arsenic trioxide, used to enhance clarity and give the glass its famous water glow. You pause at a particularly ornate cup shaped like a dragon's claw gripping a crystal sphere. It's stunning, but it's also lethal. The tip of the claw is chipped, revealing cloudy white beneath the surface. That's the core. Not beauty, not health, just poison wearing a crown of craftsmanship. The irony becomes clearer with every step. The wealthier you were, the more likely you were surrounded by danger disguised as luxury. Poor folk drank from wooden mugs, ate from simple clay bowls, but nobility demanded sparkle, innovation, alchemy in design, and they paid for it slowly, silently, until one morning they woke up and found themselves half blind, or breathless, or unable to speak. You spot a servant polishing the gallery display with a damp cloth. He moves quickly, efficiently, without gloves. He doesn't know, and neither did the dozens before him. There's a record on a nearby pedestal, a ledger of acquisitions, listing each piece's origin and ingredients. Most are marked safe or pure, but a few have small notations beside them. Tested, caused reaction. You wonder what kind. Skin, lungs, blood. The notations are vague, but consistent. Some pieces were retired from use not because anyone knew they were dangerous, but because someone important fell ill after a banquet. The items were stored, cataloged, admired. Still, they remain here beautiful and deadly, side by side. You reach the end of the gallery and notice a small plaque dedicated to a forgotten princess. She died young, it says, but not from war, plague, or childbirth. She simply faded. The word the court used was languor. Her hair fell out, her appetite vanished. Her skin turned yellow, then gray. They called in astrologers, priests, physicians. No one could help her. They blamed a curse, a spirit, a jealous rival. But her chambermaid later wrote in a diary, never meant for publication, that the princess drank nothing but herbal water, cooled in her favorite violet glass chalice, a gift from her godmother, a symbol of love, and perhaps her undoing. You look down now, thinking of all the ceremonies held here, betrothals, christenings, feasts in honor of victories. The light from the windows would have cast colored shapes onto the polished floors. Children would have chased them, laughing, unaware that the gold used to make that yellow pigment was suspended in chloride, that the blues were forged with cobalt oxide neurotoxic in vapor form. The beauty was immersive, and so was the danger. A nearby alcove contains a chest of retired glass pieces too cracked or damaged to display. You lift the lid and find a jumbled collection of shattered goblets, broken handles, half-melted figurines. The dust that rises makes your throat itch. You back away, cover your mouth. Even in ruin, the glass glows, still potent, still proud. You close the lid gently, the whisper of the hinges sounding like a sigh. And here it is again, that haunting realization that no one intended harm. The artisans sought beauty, the nobles sought refinement, the glassmakers sought innovation, but the materials had rules that human ambition refused to learn in time. You move toward the door of the gallery, feeling the light on your back, knowing now that light itself carried cost, because every flicker that passed through those panes brought more than beauty. It brought trace elements of the very things that poisoned the skin, blurred the mind, slowed the blood, and yet the court adored it. You step back into the hallway and catch your reflection in a polished suit of armor. You look like a visitor, an observer, but tonight you've walked through their rooms, breathed their air, held their heirlooms. You've seen the quiet lineage of poison not as murder, but as misunderstanding. And somehow, that's worse, because it means it will happen again. In some other form, some other palace, some other shimmering promise that blinds before it breaks. You drift next into the queen's private dressing quarters, past drawn velvet drapes and embroidered cushions, toward a lacquered cabinet nestled beneath a gilded mirror. This is no ordinary wardrobe of silks and perfumes. It is her sanctuary, her armory, her disguise, the queen's cosmetics chamber, a palace within the palace, where no men are allowed and no truths are plainly spoken. You open the mirrored doors slowly. Inside are shelves upon shelves of oils, creams, tinctures, powders, and apothecary's fantasy disguised as a vanity. Each bottle gleams under the candlelight, some capped in gold, others in carved bone, all of them labeled in a delicate, looping hand. You scan the names: spirits of white lilac, Venetian dew, milk of radiance, rouge of spring blood. The names are beautiful, poetic, but you know now what lies behind them. You recognize the poisons dressed in perfume. You reach for a jar of milk of radiance and gently unscrew the lid. Inside is a smooth, white cream, still faintly fragrant after all these years. A blend of vinegar, egg white, crushed pearls, and lead carbonate, applied nightly to the queen's face, neck, and chest. It gave her the luminous pallor prized among the court, so pale it bordered on translucent, so delicate it masked the slow rot just beneath. You set the jar down and see that it's stained with finger marks. Some of them are shallow, some dug deeper. You don't have to guess why. It itched. It always itched. Lead does that when it lives in your skin. Historians still argue whether women like her knew what they were doing to themselves, whether they were victims of fashion or its willing martyrs. But looking around this chamber, you see no ignorance. You see precision. You see commitment. Every label in this cabinet is arranged by season, by occasion, by mood. This wasn't careless vanity. It was ritual, and ritual, in its repetition, becomes sacred. To the queen, the daily application of poison was not horror, it was ceremony. And once you believe a ceremony makes you powerful, even suffering becomes a kind of privilege. You kneel to inspect a row of tinted flasks. Here is rouge of spring blood, a deep crimson paste used to tint lips and cheeks. Its color comes from cinnabar mercuric sulfide, another compound the body absorbs slowly, inexorably, until the tremors begin. And even then, it was celebrated. The queen's fluttering fingers were praised as graceful, her slow speech called poetic, her weakness mistaken for elegance. No one connected it to the jar on her dressing table. Why would they? It was beautiful. That's always the last defense. You find a brush with boar bristles, stiffened and stained pink. Nearby is a bowl of powder for the décolletage, made from chalk, talc, and occasionally white arsenic. which helped smooth the texture of skin until it peeled. There's also Venetian dew, used to maintain moisture. The recipe includes rose water, camphor, and just a trace of mercury. The glass dropper beside it is chipped at the end. You lift it to the light and notice the inside of the bottle is clouded with corrosion. That means it worked. That means it was used often. One shelf holds what might appear to be hair oils, though a closer look reveals labels like gold flux and celestial ash. These were not meant to nourish. They were bleaching agents, mixtures of alum, sulfur, and vinegar, designed to lighten the hair, sometimes over days, sometimes in a single night under moonlight. One formula includes saltpeter and quicklime. It smells faintly of eggs and metal. The queen's golden hair maintained with compounds that blistered the scalp and left permanent sores. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered about her bleeding in her sleep, but they said it with admiration. Commitment. They called it devotion to beauty. You open a drawer near the bottom and find delicate glass vials arranged in a velvet tray, each one a perfume essence of reverence, spirit of gaiety, oil of lament. You uncork one. The scent is floral, powdery, faintly herbal. It's lovely. It's also laced with tincture of belladonna deadly nightshade, used not just for its fragrance but for the way it dilated the pupils. A wide-eyed gaze was considered beautiful, romantic, and so women blinked into mirrors as their vision blurred and their hearts raced from toxicity. Some fainted, some vomited, but all of them were admired. In a lacquered tray, you find 2 small stones, one pink, one pale blue. These are known as cosmetic stones, ground with water to create skin washes. The pink one is rouge stone, composed of cinnabar and crushed coral. The blue one, azurite, laced with copper carbonate. The pink brightens. The blue cools the skin. Both were used depending on season and fashion. Both could eventually lead to organ failure. But what mattered more was that they shimmered, that they caught the eye, that the queen looked like a vision, even as her body paid the price. There's an ivory box on the highest shelf. You take it down. Inside are strips of cloth facial masks, each one meant to be soaked in vinegar and applied overnight. Some are infused with crushed poppy seeds and white lead, others with snail mucilage and egg yolk. One still carries the shape of her face, faint as a pressed flower. You run your thumb along its curve, and for a moment, you feel the sadness in it. This wasn't cruelty. This was longing. Longing to be untouched by time, to remain adored, to never fade from the room. On the vanity lies a single silver hand mirror. Its edge is tarnished, and the reflection is slightly warped. You hold it up and look into it not for yourself, but to see what she saw. A glowing face, a perfect oval, pale skin, red lips, wide black pupils, a face sculpted from powder and pain, and beneath that, perhaps, a woman who once simply wanted to be enough. You place the mirror back down, face down, and suddenly you understand something quiet and difficult. Beauty wasn't vanity. It was obligation. For queens, for noble women, for every lady paraded through these halls. To be seen was to be judged. To be loved was to perform. And the performance required sacrifice, day after day, jar after jar. You glance around the room and wonder how many prayers were whispered here. Not to gods, but to mirrors. You take one last look around. The candle flickers. The air is heavy with scent roses, vinegar, and something sour beneath. You know now that this room is not just a cabinet of curiosities. It's a confession. Every substance here promised something. Youth, clarity, softness, desire, and every one of them took something in return. Teeth, skin, sanity, life. You leave the cabinet open, as if to air out its secrets. And as you step into the corridor, you hear the faintest echo behind you, the rustle of cloth, the clink of a bottle. It's probably nothing, or maybe it's the room remembering. Not your presence, hers, the queen, rising again for another day beneath powdered light, ready to be seen, touched, adored, and never questioned. You find yourself in a dim hallway, the stone walls damp with age, the torches long since extinguished. and ahead of you lies a narrow staircase curling downward into a space that was never meant to welcome visitors. These are the service passages, winding paths between the walls, built for secrecy and speed, for servants to move unseen while royalty dined, slept, and schemed. Your footsteps echo lightly as you descend, each step cooler than the last, until you reach a door so small you must duck to enter. On the other side, a room that doesn't belong in a palace. Not exactly, not officially. And yet, here it is, a chamber of iron and shadow, with stone shelves, clay pots, and a strange metallic smell that clings to the back of your throat the moment you breathe it in. This is the Alchemist's second laboratory, the one no one ever speaks of. Not the place for elegant distillations or golden dreams. This is where antimony lived. The pot sits at the center of the table, dull, blackened, unassuming. It contains a grayish powder, clumped with moisture and ringed with the remnants of countless boilings. This is antimony in its working form, a metalloid known in modern terms for its toxicity, but revered in medieval times as something miraculous. It could purge the body of excess humors, restore balance, cleanse the soul. It was, to alchemists and physicians alike, a divine correction, but the correction came with a cost. In high doses, it caused vomiting so violent it ruptured blood vessels. In small doses, it still eroded the stomach lining. But this wasn't seen as failure. It was the proof it worked. The more you suffered, the more it was said to be working. You glance at a scroll pinned to the wall, faded but legible. Sic transit impuritas, thus passes impurity. You exhale and wonder how many stomachs were emptied for the sake of purity. Among the strangest of antimony's uses was the so-called everlasting pill, a small sphere made of solid antimony, designed to be swallowed, passed, and yes, retrieved, cleaned, and swallowed again, over and over. The pill purged the bowels so thoroughly that it was said to leave the soul lighter. Nobles prized it. Some took it daily. You pick one up from a dish, cold and oddly smooth. The idea of something that moves through your body like a borrowed object, doing its violent work only to be used again. It's both fascinating and quietly horrifying. You wonder who first had the idea to retrieve such a thing from the chamber pot and decide it was worth repeating. But repeat it they did, again and again. In castles across Europe, it became a mark of discipline, a medical rite of passage. Nearby lies a flask labeled tartar emetic, an antimony compound dissolved in wine or spirit to ease dosing. You know the effects: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, often severe. But here's the twist. When taken in tiny, barely measurable doses over long periods, it caused subtle mental changes, anxiety, depression, lethargy, not all at once. Not enough to raise alarm, just a soft, steady dimming, like a candle with a too short wick. Some believed it quieted the mind, others called it spiritual purification. You recall a diary entry from a royal page who noted that the queen grew calmer after her physician began daily drops of a new elixir. 3 months later, she was bedridden, another 2, and she was gone. The cause was ruled exhaustion of the womb. The vial, empty, was kept as a relic. In the corner of the room, you notice a ledger open to a page titled Subjects and Results. It lists names, symptoms, doses, responses. One entry reads, Lord Henry, refused porridge, administered antimony syrup, complained of stomach fire, died at dawn. Another cook's son observed retching, survived, now walks with uneven gait. You close the book before reading more. It's not just the outcomes that are disturbing, it's the calmness in the handwriting. As if this were all part of a system. Pain recorded as data, vomiting charted as progress. Historians still debate whether antimony was used more as a medicine or a punishment. In small doses, it was meant to cure. In larger ones, to silence. There are whispers in old texts of wives given tinctures to calm their nerves, of sons dosed to quell rebellion, of mistresses made compliant through syruped wine. One story tells of a court musician who began hallucinating after a week of purgation, claiming to see angels dripping silver tears. He was said to be touched by the divine. He was also blind in one eye and could no longer stand. Still, his story was retold for years. You turn to another table, where bits of dried root and bark are arranged like puzzle pieces. These were used to flavor the antimony, to soften the blow, licorice, anise, fennel scents strong enough to hide the metal's sting, but not strong enough to erase what followed. You can picture it now, a goblet presented with reverence, the recipient smiling faintly, unaware of what had been laced inside, or perhaps they did know. Perhaps it was worth it, to be purged, to be cleansed, to feel that false lightness after the storm. If you were a noble, discipline of the body meant control of the soul. Pain was refinement. Antimony wasn't confined to ingestion, it was worn as well. Some nobles embedded it into rings or amulets, believing its presence would ward off disease. Others applied it to the skin in salves meant to draw out fevers. One salve recipe you find here includes beeswax, bear fat, and powdered antimony mixed with turpentine. You lift the jar and find the mixture still pliable, still clinging to the edges like tar. It smells like old pine and copper. One application could cause blisters, 2, necrosis, but the skin was considered the body's canvas, and sometimes you had to strip away the old painting to make space for the new. In the far corner of the lab is a chest of correspondence, letters between alchemists, detailing experiments, theories, and recipes. Some discuss successes, more describe suffering. One line stands out. From a man named Elias to his colleague in Florence, I have found the perfect balance. The subject does not scream now, only sighs. You read it twice, then a third time. Then you close the box, because understanding something doesn't make it any easier to forgive. As you step away, your foot bumps a wooden bowl under the table. Inside it, dried herbs crumble into dust. Clinging to the rim, a metal spoon rests inside. Scratched along the handle are the initials of a name you recognize, a royal steward who died abruptly at 34. The official cause, cold wind, but the physician's notes, which you recall from another room, mentioned violent emptying, a phrase repeated twice. You look again at the bowl. You don't need more evidence. You already know. You return to the door and look back once. The room is still, the candle guttering low, the shadows long, and in the center of it all, that pot of gray powder, antimony, the metal that was medicine, weapon, salvation. It gleamed like progress. It promised purification, but it delivered nothing clean, only emptiness, shivering, and quiet suffering disguised as control. You step back into the passage. The air somehow clearer now. You breathe deeply, even if the scent of the room still clings to your skin. You remember what they whispered in court when someone lost weight suddenly, or seemed dazed after a banquet. They've been balanced. You almost laugh, but you don't, because here, balance never meant health. It meant obedience. You return now to the royal astrologer's quarters, tucked within a round tower overlooking the eastern horizon, where the first light of dawn was said to grant the clearest visions. The room is circular, walled with bookshelves that bow under the weight of centuries of observation, speculation, and contradiction. There's a long wooden table cluttered with brass instruments, astrolabes, compasses, quadrant charts, and a single narrow window that opens to the stars. Above the hearth hangs a zodiac wheel, painted onto a cracked wooden disc, its colors faded from candle smoke and time. This was where futures were predicted, and sicknesses explained not by blood or bile, but by Venus in retrograde or the square of Mars. You approach the desk and see the open parchment, a natal chart of the king himself. Time of birth, planetary alignment, elements rising and falling. On the corner, in red ink, the words Mars in the house of flesh, imbalance in humors likely. You blink. That's not medicine. That's prophecy pretending to be prescription. In the medieval court, the astrologer wasn't just an entertainer or a scholar. He was a physician superior, a moral advisor, a strategist. Every diagnosis, every treatment, every royal mood was checked against the sky. If the king coughed during a waning moon, it was seen differently than if he coughed during Mercury's ascendancy. You pick up a vellum scroll marked with moon phases and treatment calendars. One day is circled favorable for bloodletting. Avoid sweetened elixirs. A week later, the king received his favorite honeyed cordial and fell into a fevered haze. No one blamed the ingredients. They blamed Saturn. There's a shelf lined with small vials, each labeled with planetary symbols: gold powder under the sign of the sun, silver dust for the moon, iron shavings for Mars. These were added to medicines not for chemical benefit, though some believed in the metal's power, but for alignment. The stars had to agree with the medicine, otherwise it wouldn't work. The danger wasn't in the toxin, the danger was in mistiming it. The astrologer was consulted before surgeries, before childbirth, before even love letters were sent. In one record, a suitor delayed his proposal for 3 months because Venus was in mourning. You shake your head, but gently, because belief, when systematized, becomes its own form of truth. You open a ledger and find a series of correspondences, letters between the astrologer and the royal physician. Some are practical requests for updated charts, predictions for seasonal illnesses, but others are chilling in their confidence. One entry reads, "The prince shows signs of melancholia. Mars is near his heart. Recommend tincture of saffron and restraint from physical pleasures until the stars recede." Another queen's continued swelling of the limbs, likely due to Jupiter's interference. Suspend pearl water. Begin silver infusion on next full moon. You note the dates. 2 weeks later, she collapsed. 3 months after that, she was buried. The moon, it seems, was not held accountable. On the far side of the chamber sits a brass orrery, its gears still intact. You turn it gently. The planets begin their slow procession, orbiting the central sun with the solemnity of judges. You imagine the astrologer watching this at midnight, candle flickering beside him, whispering to himself as Venus slides behind the curve of the moon. He would have felt it not as a curiosity, but as a message. The world, to him, spoke in orbits. He just had to listen, and he wasn't alone. Royalty didn't question these readings. They depended on them. Whole campaigns were delayed, marriages postponed, surgeries rescheduled, all because a bronze sphere told them the sky said no. Historians still debate whether these astrologers believed what they wrote. Some were con men, certainly, but others were sincere, navigating the heavens the only way they knew how. With charts and ratios and inherited wisdom, they didn't see themselves as mystics. They were scientists of a sort, and the court gave them power accordingly. You find a decree from the king, sealed in wax, granting the astrologer jurisdiction over certain medical matters. It's signed with a flourish and ends with the phrase, "Let none overrule the heavens." You sit with that line, "Let none overrule the heavens." Not even common sense, not even survival. You approach a desk drawer, partially open, and discover a bundle of horoscopes written for members of the court. Some are optimistic, fortune favors your house this spring, others far less so. One reads, "Beware the sweet voice in the 5th house. She carries iron beneath her tongue." You think of the nobleman who died shortly after marrying a young woman praised for her singing voice. The cause of death was lingering illness. You wonder how much that phrase covered in those days, how much superstition was used to explain what Mercury had already started. In one corner of the room stands a model of the human body, carved in wood and painted with the 4 humors: red for blood, yellow for bile, black for melancholy, white for phlegm. Each organ is connected to a planet by thread. The heart is ruled by the sun, the liver by Jupiter, the spleen, Saturn. Treatments were assigned accordingly. If a patient had spleen trouble, he was considered under Saturn's shadow, and Saturn required purging, often through lead-based tinctures. You know how this ends. You've seen enough of the aftermath. But here, in this room, it all begins mapped out with stars and threads and misplaced faith. There's a note pinned beside the model. It reads, "No surgery during Mars." Beneath it, another line, "Mercury days favor speech, not action." You laugh, but it's a tired sound, because behind these lines were lives, bodies paused, operations delayed, infections given time to grow, all because of what the stars were doing. You wonder how many people died quietly while astrologers rearranged the heavens. You sit in the astrologer's chair and look at the night sky through the narrow window. It's clear tonight, the stars bright, unblinking. You imagine trying to make sense of them without a telescope, without physics, just stories and pattern and longing. You understand, maybe, why they looked up so often. The world below made no sense. Disease struck the healthy, the beautiful withered, the loyal were betrayed. But the sky followed its rules. At least up there, something moved with rhythm. You find a final parchment pinned to the underside of the table. It's a list of dates, eclipses, comets, blood moons marked with corresponding court events. You trace your finger along one line. Comet, winter, year of the hunt. King's left hand goes numb. Another eclipse. 2 horses collapse in courtyard. Infant dies before baptism. No science, just correlation. But to them, that was enough. You close the drawer and breathe slowly. And here it is again, that ache, that grief for belief. The realization that these weren't foolish men, just men with broken maps. The court didn't poison itself out of malice. It did so with purpose, with order, with meaning. Every dose, every decision, every fatal tincture was taken at just the right hour, under just the right stars, because someone in a tower said it was safe, or necessary, or ordained. You rise and leave the chamber, the door groaning shut behind you. The stars stay fixed above, as they always have, and you walk on beneath them, reminded that the most dangerous decisions are not made in the dark, but in the light of what we think we know. You step through a corridor thick with mildew and old breath, back into the royal wing, where the echo of polished boots once clicked against tiled floors, but now you follow a trail that leads somewhere quieter beneath the flagstones, under the chapel, into a room preserved not by intention but by neglect. A crypt, yes, but not of bones. A chamber of medical notes, coroner's letters, scribbled treatments, burial garments folded beside forgotten diagnoses. And in the center of this silent archive, there is a table. On it lies a wax-coated sheet, curled at the edges, bearing one phrase, post-mortem, his blood ran silver. You pause, not poetic, literal, because the king, yes, that king, the beloved, the golden one, was glowing when they opened him. It wasn't a glow like in fairy tales, no holy light, just a sheen, a shimmer, faint, metallic, as if his blood had taken on the memory of mirrors. You lift the sheet, and beneath it, another note. Discoloration of tissue consistent with mercury presence, gums blackened, kidneys crystallized. You don't need a physician to translate. You already know. He was poisoned, but not with malice, not with a dagger or a chalice or a whisper behind the curtain. He was poisoned by medicine, by loyalty, by the very people paid to preserve him. His death was not an act of violence. It was the final chapter of care. You walk around the room slowly, eyes scanning scrolls and letters, the occasional dried flower between pages. One note catches your attention, a physician's letter to the Queen. His Majesty's trembling is likely celestial in nature, but we have begun treatment with a silver infusion, aided by electuary and balm. That means mercury, and possibly antimony, maybe gold salts too. All of it dressed in fancy names: lunar tincture, divine salts, blessed metal dew. It didn't matter that he shook in bed. It didn't matter that he couldn't sleep, or walk, or remember the names of his children. The treatments continued because to stop them would mean admitting fault, and in court medicine, fault was treason. A cabinet in the corner contains jars labeled in spidery Latin. You open one. The scent punches your throat: ammonia and decay. Preserved organs, royal, likely, each one tagged: spleen, discolored, liver, fibrotic, tongue, blackened edges. The king's body was examined, and every piece catalogued. But nowhere is there an apology. Only notes, only the careful language of detachment. Historians still argue whether his condition was due to dosage or to underlying illness, whether the physicians overreached or merely obeyed. But the glow, they agree, was real, documented, witnessed, and perhaps, in some deeply disturbing way, admired. You find a velvet pouch tucked between 2 scrolls. Inside it, teeth, human, cracked, some blackened. One is capped in gold. Another shows signs of rot that must have made speech painful. Next to the pouch, a record of royal dental routines, vinegar rinses, powdered coral, tinctures of clove oil and alum, and yes, mercury-based paste said to clarify the breath and whiten the enamel. You imagine a king smiling through a court dinner, jaw aching, mouth shimmering with the very element that would soon eat his nervous system from within. And still, they praised his regal bearing. In another drawer, the Queen's correspondence. You read her words. He seems distant now, but the physicians insist this is the purging before restoration. That phrase, again, purging, as if suffering were just a prelude to glory. She continues, I pray this is not the result of the Venetian elixir. I watched him take it with hope. The Venetian elixir, a popular preparation of mercury, camphor, and other alchemical correctives, sold at extravagant prices to nobles across Europe. It shimmered in the bottle, it promised lucidity, and it killed slowly. 1 page down, you discover a chart symptoms mapped against lunar cycles. Sleeplessness peaked during waning crescent, skin paling in harmony with eclipse. They believed his decay followed the sky, that the stars could predict the loss of his speech, that the planets explained the twitching in his hands. No one questioned the medicine, because medicine was guided by the heavens. And if the heavens agreed, how could one object? You lean over the autopsy report, more detailed than most, fluid in the lungs, suggestive of tincture inhalation, crystalline deposits behind the eyes, brain softened, no pus. You pause at that last part. No pus, which means no infection, just deterioration, clean, gradual, irreversible. It was not disease that claimed him. It was the slow accumulation of faith in the wrong substances. You imagine his final weeks sweating beneath the silks, surrounded by whispered prayers, sipping from goblets laced with well-intentioned death. A separate folder contains medical purchases from the royal ledger. You trace the names quicksilver, white lead paste, antimony wine, blessed water of gold. These were not rare treatments. They were common, celebrated, even envied. Lesser nobles begged to use the same potions. The king's body became a symbol not of health, but of access, of privilege. And when his eyes went dull, it was said he was crossing the alchemical veil. You let the irony settle. He crossed nothing but into the afterlife of someone medicated to death by reverence. In the center of the room sits a glass coffin, long emptied, but lined with the original embalming cloths. You approach it. The fabric has darkened with time, but a faint glint remains silver dust, embedded in the weave. They dusted his skin with it before burial, as if to preserve what had already destroyed him. You picture the procession courtiers weeping, banners at half-mast, and beneath them, a glowing king. His body, a final statement of belief in an invisible science that offered no mercy. You reach out and brush the cloth. It crumbles slightly, like a lie too old to hold its shape. One last drawer. Inside it, a sketch, pencil on vellum, the king's face, drawn post-mortem, eyelids closed, mouth slightly parted. There's a shimmer along the jawline carefully rendered. The artist must have seen it himself, that faint, impossible gleam. Beneath the sketch, a note. He was beautiful in death, and in that sentence, everything is revealed. Even poisoned, even fading, he was still expected to be an icon, a myth, a symbol, and so he became one, lit from within not by soul or spirit, but by the very substances that stole his breath. You sit for a while in the stillness, no footsteps above, no bells, just the hum of memory. You've wandered through poison and perfume, through alchemy and belief, and now you see the whole arc. The court didn't kill its king with hatred. It killed him with devotion. Every vial offered in faith. Every drop poured with trembling hands and whispered blessings. Death wasn't an accident. It was a ceremony. And you understand now what no one dared say aloud. The king's glow wasn't just the trace of mercury or the shine of embalming salts. It was the mark of obedience to a system that worshipped transformation but forgot survival. To physicians who feared their failures more than they feared harm, to a court that believed in beauty, balance, and the stars, but not in consequence. You rise. The chamber fades behind you, and as you walk back toward the echo of torchlight, the final image lingers, a monarch glowing gently in the dark, surrounded by silence, still dignified, still royal, still utterly, tragically wrong. You climb now toward the final chamber, the physician's archive, tucked behind a concealed stone panel near the royal chapel's altar. It's less a room than a sealed confession, a long, low hall lined with oak cabinets, drawers without handles, and the heavy perfume of preserved herbs and ancient ink. You duck to enter, feeling the air shift, denser here, as if the space itself is reluctant to let go of its secrets. The floor creaks with memory. You run your hand along a shelf labeled dosages administered, highborn only, and feel the dust coat your fingertips like ceremonial ash. There's reverence in this place, but it's not pure. It's the reverence of caution, of fear, because what these physicians knew, they never dared say aloud. There's a table in the middle, lit by a slit of gray daylight, upon which rests an enormous book, unlabeled, bound in cracked leather, its cover warped with moisture and time. You open it. Page after page of treatment notes, written in the same hand, spanning decades. The entries begin with optimism. Administered syrup of violet for cough. Signs of improvement swift. But as you turn, the confidence rots. Queen's breath shallow. Pulse irregular, antimony applied again. No response. Further on, Prince hallucinating after mercury decoction. Suggested divine cause. And then King's eyes clouded. Elixir given. No change. Next moon cycle, prepare for death. The writing grows smaller, shakier, until the last entries look like whispers scrawled in desperation. You can almost hear the sighs that followed each note, the soft prayer that maybe this time the stars would align. A drawer beneath the book contains small stoppered bottles still labeled, still half filled. You lift one, etched faintly with the sign of Saturn, inside a blackish syrup, thick as pitch. You tilt it and watch it move with unnatural slowness. Beside it, a smaller vial marked only for quiet, the physician's final resort. You know what it is. A sedative so powerful it silenced not just pain, but dissent. It was used in moments of royal panic, when madness struck, when secrets had to stay secrets, when someone needed to stop crying, stop speaking, stop remembering. It worked. Every time. Historians still debate how much these physicians truly understood, whether they knew their treatments were destructive, or whether they trusted too deeply in the alchemical ideals passed down to them: balance, cleansing, elevation through suffering. Some argue they were victims of the era, blind to the slow deaths they caused. Others say they were too clever not to know. The truth, as always, likely lies in between. They knew enough to hide their records, to bury their recipes under stone slabs, to encode dosages into horoscopes and planetary hours. They knew enough to keep silent when the screams began. And silence, after all, is a kind of guilt. You find a scroll rolled tightly and bound with twine. You unroll it gently. It's a diagram, a body drawn in charcoal, each organ labeled with both its function and its alchemical weakness. Heart heat, therefore treat with cooling metals. Liver fire, best subdued by silver. Brain air, soothed with lead. Yes, lead. The metal of roofs and goblets, of pipes and pigments. They gave it to the noblest minds in syrup form, to calm nerves, to steady mood. It worked. At first, then it dimmed the eyes, slurred the speech, ruined the memory, and no one knew why. Or maybe they did, but the stars told them to continue. In one corner of the archive is a cabinet of patient masks, linen soaked in vinegar and herbs, worn during plagues and noxious vapors. But here's something else. A row of tiny silver spoons, each marked with a noble's crest. They weren't just cutlery, they were calibrated doses. A spoonful of syrup of mercury, a half spoon of bitter antimony wine, a quarter spoon of powdered lead mixed into pomegranate juice. These weren't accidents. These were rituals. Each dose matched to moon and hour, each fatal in its own polite way. And you think again of the children, the young heirs who grew pale too soon, the coughing girls, the trembling boys, all marked as sickly, all treated by men who believed they were guiding the soul through necessary fire. One scroll records a child's tincture schedule, 10 days of mercury wine, followed by 3 of fasting, then a compound syrup of crushed pearls and egg yolk. The handwriting is pristine. The child died before her 8th birthday. The physician's note, she showed such strength. A low drawer clicks open as you pass a mechanism worn with use. Inside, a collection of confession letters, not religious, not addressed to priests, but to other physicians. One begins, Brother in Mercury, I fear we have crossed into shadow. Another, the king's decline does not follow the stars. I suspect the very elixirs we offer are unmaking him. And a third, I prepare his final mixture with trembling hands. I do not believe it will save him. But what else is there? These men were not evil. They were trapped by tradition, by pride, by the unbearable truth that they might be the cause of royal ruin. You sit now at the center of this archive and feel the weight of it all pressing in. The centuries of belief, the experiments turned to edicts, the poisons renamed potions, the dying wrapped in dignity. The court never lacked care, but it mistook ritual for reason. It offered suffering as a path to salvation, and in its eagerness to transform men into something greater, it forgot how to keep them alive. The wind outside shifts, faint through the narrow slits of stone, and for a moment it sounds like breath, not yours, not now, but echoes. You imagine the last physician standing here, just before the archive was sealed. He would have blown out the candles, folded the final notes, perhaps whispered a name to the empty air, someone he failed to save, and then he left, leaving behind not a legacy, but a lesson, one that no one learned in time. You walk toward the exit now. The hallway feels longer, your footsteps slower. You've seen too much, maybe, or maybe just enough. Enough to understand how good intentions, wrapped in velvet and gold, can still leave bodies cold. Enough to know that behind every myth of glowing monarchs and divine elixirs is a room like this full of notes no one was meant to find. At the door, you pause. One last scroll lies near the threshold. You unroll it without hope. It's a list. Names, dates, all dead, all treated. A line runs across the bottom, barely legible. We meant to heal. We learned too late. You don't need anything more. You step through the stone passage, and the door slides shut behind you, leaving the archive sealed again, quiet, heavy, complete. And now, you're back in your room. The stone walls of forgotten archives fade, the hum of torches dies out, the rustle of scrolls and soft scrape of silver spoons is replaced by the sound of your own breath. The story has ended, but its echo lingers quiet, steady, like a thread pulling gently at the edge of your thoughts. You lie there, eyes soft, not quite closed. You don't need to remember every detail. The glowing kings, the trembling hands of the physician, the strange powders stirred by candlelight. They'll wait. They always do. History doesn't vanish. It just settles in the corners, like dust on a forgotten book. No need to keep it all. Just let it rest with you now, like the silence that follows an old lullaby. The alchemists, with all their hope and hubris, wanted to change the world. They failed, mostly, but in failing, they left stories that drift like mist through time, beautiful, terrible, and strangely comforting, because even in their most poisonous mistakes, they were reaching for something, and maybe that's all any of us do. Reach, try, hope. So breathe slowly. The stars are just where they were, unmoved by the drama below. The court has gone still. The vials are stoppered. The throne room is dark. Nothing is waiting for you now except stillness. You're safe. You're here. And it's time to let go of the glowing blood, the heavy cloaks, the cursed cures. Let sleep take you like a velvet curtain closing gently over a stage. No final words, just warmth. No more kings, no more cures, only the quiet.